Many years ago, this world was calm and beautiful, but one day, reality and fantasy merged, turning this world into something like a game. Dark clouds appeared in the sky, against which flashes of lightning stood out brightly, helping a huge number of terrible monsters to emerge, making their way through the cities, destroying houses and the people living in them. Many dungeons and secret kingdoms began to appear, teeming with wild monsters and creatures, and because of this, the world was on the verge of destruction, but humanity would never lose, and during the revolution that occurred, the ancestors of people mastered extraordinary powers that affect the type of activity of people. Thanks to this, people armed themselves, were ready to fight and gain strength to resist the monsters. Going out to battle in small groups or alone, people, using their newly acquired talents, attacked huge monsters in order to protect other people from the monsters. The emergence of job changers allowed some cities to survive, and the people defending these cities had their arms raised in a warlike manner. Currently, in Daocheng, in the central park near the entrance to the forest reserve, Chui San, standing on a platform, extended his arms out to the sides, telling the story of the appearance of monsters and talents in humans to a large group of young people standing below and listening attentively. He added that the monsters continued to harm them, and asked if these guys knew why this was happening. Sen seriously announced that it was all because not all job changers were prepared to face the monsters head-on, and so he explained that all jobs were divided into 3 main categories, namely, combat, support, and civilian. Civilians made up 90% of the entire population, and it was not they who protected this world, but the remaining 10% of combat jobs. Listening to this, Lin Gangfeng stood with his lips pressed tightly together, and stopped at the very last row, his brows slightly furrowed, his eyes narrowed, but he did not say anything. Clenching his hands into fists, he recalled how some time ago, when he was still young, some serious people warned him that if he did not understand, then resisting would only lead to the waste of his sister's talent. These same people declared that it was not he who was protecting this world, but they. But the protagonist was quickly distracted from his thoughts, as he noticed that the boys and girls standing in front of him turned to look at him carefully. Someone asked if he was really that school genius? Some remembered that a rare profession had awakened within him, and so they wondered if he was also participating in today's evaluation competition. Someone, watching him in shock, asked if he was really not afraid at all. Raising his palm in greeting, Gangfeng grinned faintly, guessing that he was just in time. At that moment, Qi Yanran suddenly asked to be let through, pushing her way through several guys, and irritated, shouted Gangfeng's name, asking why he was so late. He looked at her in confusion, and she grinned, pointed her finger at him, and admitted that she thought he wouldn't dare to show up here with a terrible profession. Her profession was a fire mage, and the protagonist, closing his eyes, lowered his head, and calmly said that there were no terrible professions, only terrible people. Hearing this saying, several guys standing closest to him froze, their eyes widened, and looked at him in amazement. In contrast, Yanran was not so surprised, and chuckled. She exclaimed that Gangfeng did not even have friends to team up with. She asked if it was true that he was unlucky in life. The protagonist remained silent for a while, narrowing his eyes and looking at her, and finally, turning his back to her, he declared that everything was fine, since he did not plan to team up with anyone. At this time, Yanran was already astonished and asked in confusion, what did this mean? She declared that participating in such a competition alone was very reckless, and warned that he needed to find allies first, and only then participate in the evaluation event. Gangfeng closed his eyes, saying that having like-minded people only brought about an exchange of experiences, so participating alone would be wiser. Frowning in displeasure, she called him stubborn, and promised that she would not run to save him if something went wrong. Gangfeng at this point slowly started to walk away, and Yanran followed behind him, deciding that if he could tone down his temper, she would let him join her team. After all, out of all the students in Daocheng High School, only he could match her, and she thought it would be better to take him than some slacker. Hearing her words, many people became more annoyed, and one of the guys sarcastically called Gangfeng a genius, clearly doubting it, as he thought that his profession might not be that strong at all. The guy next to him agreed, declaring that the evaluation competition would put everything in its place. At this moment, San, drawing attention to himself, asked if everyone was ready. He announced that the secret realm had been activated, and explained that by stepping onto the platform, the guys would be transported to the peripheral area of the secret realm. He mentioned that they would have 3 days, and once they reached level 3 and the minimum for professionals, they would officially become qualified monster hunters. Hearing this, the girls and boys frowned and smiled in anticipation, clenching their hands into fists, and San reminded them that the zone was limited to the 3 outer layers, and it was very dangerous to cross the boundaries. Finally, he shouted that the evaluation test was starting, and upon hearing this, the protagonist frowned and immediately ran forward. Yanran, who ran after him, frowned in annoyance when she noticed that he was faster, and clenching her hand into a fist, she dissatisfiedly shouted that she was ahead of her again, and asked why he was so capable. While Changfeng began to climb the stairs, she ran after him, angry that he was better at everything since middle school, and as a high school graduate, he overtook her again. When the protagonist had already stepped onto the platform, Yanran had just reached it, and the guys watching it froze, amazed by what they had seen, and they especially paid attention to the speed at which Changfeng moved, as he had reached the platform in the blink of an eye. They had assumed that his profession would not be the best, but they admitted that his physical fitness was truly admirable. At this moment, the preparations for the teleportation were finally completed, and San warned Changfeng to prepare for it. His destination was the forest reserve, and when he was surrounded by streams of magical energy, San began the countdown to activation, counting down from 3 to 1. Frowning confidently, the protagonist thought that the day of the test to evaluate the level of professionalism had arrived. The teleportation was finally activated, and seeing a portal formed in front of him, Changfeng jumped into it, finding himself in the forest reserve. As he landed, Guahai looked around and asked San what level he thought these disciples could reach. San frowned slightly and looked away, declaring that reaching level 5 would be a good result, but among them, the only one worthy of attention was the girl named Yanran. This was because fire mages were rare, but they had a significant advantage in both defense and offense. He also wanted to talk about Changfeng, and said that on the day he awakened, there was a strange anomaly in the sky, so it seemed that he was the only mage who was classified as a combat profession, because throughout history, there were several cases of strange anomalies in the sky, and as a result, the profession that awakened in a person was useless. Sen also said that he had examined the undead that the protagonist summoned, and declared that their abilities were comparable to those of level 2 monsters. At this moment, Changfeng stood up, still assessing the situation around him, and San noted that it had been many years since a talent had appeared in Daoqing. Suddenly, a monster roared and jumped out from the bushes behind the protagonist, and Changfeng frowned and realized that it was a level 1 wild rabbit. Abruptly drawing his dagger from its sheath, he mentally exclaimed that such a monster would be good for a warm-up, and turning around, he changed his position, getting into a more comfortable fighting position, and struck the monster, causing the rabbit to fall to the ground dead with a final sigh. The protagonist looked at this with boredom, and the system announced that the level 1 Xianglin wild rabbit had been defeated, and thanks to this, Changfeng earned 5% experience. Sighing, he mentally noted that he could deal with level 1 monsters alone. He was a newly awakened professional, and now he thought that in this world, when a person turns 18, he gets the opportunity to change his occupation in the job change tower. When a person changes jobs, they are faced with the choice of continuing to live as an ordinary person or taking part in an assessment test to become a qualified monster hunter. While Changfeng was thinking about this, groups of other guys were sneaking around the places they had teleported to, moving carefully or hiding so as not to be noticed by higher-level monsters. The protagonist, also sneaking around the forest, hid behind a tree to have an advantage, and thought that he had decided to become a professional, not because of patriotism, but because professionals make a lot of money. He saw his parents being drafted by other people into the military and never returning, and on top of that, his sister was forcibly taken away by others because of her talent, and he was unable to do anything about it. Thinking about this, he jumped out from behind the tree he had hidden behind, holding a dagger at the ready, and attacked the rabbit that was not expecting it, killing it. Realizing how powerless he was in a country where even the laws couldn't protect his loved ones, he decided that he had to become stronger, and now he had increased his experience again when the monster finally died. Suddenly, noticing something to the side, he frowned and turned around to see a second-level gray rat. He was astonished, repeating the name of the monster and its level, and sighed, frowning, because he knew that the monsters of this secret realm were scattered in different areas and should not appear so quickly. He knew that it would not be so easy to deal with a second-level monster, and activated magic, ordering the broken undead to move forward. The first-level broken undead that appeared in front of him ran forward, preparing to engage the gray rat, and Changfeng added to his order, asking the undead to deal with the monster. The gray rat froze in amazement, noticing a new opponent, and began to peer at it carefully. Suddenly, the ground lifted up, cracking, and several more gray rats crawled out. Hearing the noise behind him, the protagonist turned around, noticing that 3 more rats had appeared, and wondered what this meant. He wondered why there were so many second-tier monsters here, and frowned as he tried to find an answer. Facing such opponents on the first day, most teams would not have a chance to win. However, looking at how the undead he had summoned began to fight the monster, Changfeng smirked, declaring that he was able to summon several creatures at once, and activated his magic again. Some time ago, when he was standing near the tower with a fire burning on top and a recognized undead appeared next to him, the people watching him laughed, and called him weak, as they thought that in such a situation, he would definitely use the skills of his rare profession. However, they had no intention of teaming up with him, as they assumed that even a human scavenger would be more useful than Changfeng. When he extended his hand to the side and began to control his undead, everyone saw the characteristics of it, noting that the undead was at level 1 and had a combat strength of 5. This only made the onlookers laugh harder, as the undead had the combat strength of an ordinary person. In addition, summoning the creatures took a lot of mana, and these people assumed that it would be better for the protagonist to fight on his own. They were also astonished that he actually wanted to go to Tsinghua University, so they shouted that it would be better for him to remain a scavenger on the outskirts of the city. Yanran, angry at what she heard, activated her magic, causing a fire to appear next to her, and she frowned and prepared to go to the guys who were speaking ill of Changfeng in order to shut them up as well. Uncle Chi closed his eyes and stopped her by holding her hand, asking her not to interfere. In response to the words of the guys watching him, Changfeng simply mentally called them a bunch of idiots, and activated the system window, frowning and carefully examining his attributes. He looked at his name, the profession of the Undead Overlord, which was a unique hidden profession, level 1, strength equal to 15, fortitude equal to the same level, spirit equal to 30, agility which level was 15, and the number of undead that could be summoned, of which 4 could be summoned at this level. Changfeng's skill was the summoning and control of undead, as well as spiritual destruction, which could strike within 5 meters, suppressing the opponent's mind. In addition, the protagonist had a unique hidden attribute called Spiritual Awakening. This attribute was unlocked at level 6, and briefly thinking back to the guys who called him names, Changfeng thought that they were as stupid as the people who kidnapped his sister, and he paid special attention to his hidden skill. At this moment he smirked, thinking that he was not a simple summoner, but the Lord of the Undead, and strengthening his magic, he ordered his subjects to rise up. The undead increased in number, and when they appeared, armed monsters immediately approached the rats to fight them. It wasn't long before the system notified Changfeng several times that his undead had killed a level 2 gray rat, and in the end, thanks to all this, he gained 100 experience points and reached level 2. Frowning, he smiled faintly as his level increased, and then he looked at the undead who were still fighting, swinging their weapons, trying to kill the last living rat. However, the monster successfully resisted, and at one point, the gray rat managed to pick the right time to attack, and with a wave of its paw with sharp large claws, it destroyed the undead summoned by Changfeng. Noticing this, the protagonist frowned, asking himself what was going on. The thing was that he understood that rats could not be stronger than the undead he summoned, and so he carefully looked at the monster, who, crouching down, clenched its jaws, baring its fangs, and suddenly its body changed, its muscles increased, and 2 wings appeared on its back. Focusing especially on the wings, Changfeng asked himself, could this be the Rat King? He was astonished that this monster also increased its level, and snapping his fingers, he summoned the undead, and then pointed his finger towards the rat, giving an unspoken order. The undead immediately charged towards the Rat King, attacking it from different directions, and the protagonist, watching the battle from the side, thought that the second-tier monsters that should not appear on the outskirts of the zone had suddenly gathered here, raising their level to the level of elite monsters. Although this was a test of professionalism, there were still too many rats, but in the end, Changfeng did not think about it for too long and simply decided that he would kill even these elite monsters. At this moment, the Rat King jumped up into the air, evading the undead, and noticing that the monster was superior to his subordinates, the protagonist activated his skill again, deciding that he would summon 3 more undead if the 3 undead he summoned were not enough. His hand was enveloped in magical energy, he frowned, clenched his jaw, concentrated, and soon 3 new undead that appeared headed towards the king, also rising into the air and surrounding it from all sides. After a while of fighting, the undead managed to throw the Rat King to the ground, and it fell with such force that a large amount of dust rose into the air. Changfeng, frowning, tightly pressed his lips together, looking at this cloud of dust, and suddenly a gray rat jumped out of it, heading towards the protagonist at high speed. He calmly thought that the Rat King's decision to attack him was very resourceful, but he did not start to run away or even take up his dagger, but simply stretched out his hand forward, ready to use his skill. He mentally exclaimed that it would not work, and frowned, using spiritual destruction, capable of striking within 5 meters, suppressing the enemy's mind. Magical energy appeared next to his palm, illuminating the space around him, and a large number of dark small hands seemed to gather above the rat's head, approaching its eyes to penetrate its mind. When this happened, the rat saw a large number of blurry, scary silhouettes around him, and screamed in horror, and Changfeng ordered him to fix it. Suddenly, he noticed that a faintly glowing pattern was visible on the forehead of the frightened Rat King, and after looking closely at the symbol, the protagonist asked himself, was this really a mark? He was very surprised, and at that moment, he noticed that everything began to blur, and the effect of his skill was stopped due to the fact that the Rat King's head suddenly exploded. Shocked by this, he even shuddered and, opening his mouth in amazement, mentally exclaimed that the Rat King seriously destroyed himself. Looking at the corpse of the monster, he thought that the spiritual destruction could suppress the minds of monsters within a radius of 5 meters, but he realized that it felt like the mind of this monster was already under the influence of someone else's spiritual destruction. He scared the Rat King, but he could not force it to obey, and for a while he was distracted from thinking about it, as the system notified him that he had killed a level 4 monster. The undead summoned by Changfeng continued to linger near them, and he finally decided that what happened to the Rat King was unimportant, since the important thing now was to level up. He wanted to reach level 6 as soon as possible to obtain a unique hidden attribute, and mentally turning to his sister, he asked her to wait for him, and promised that he would arrive very soon. Confidently clenching his hands into fists, he walked forward, heading deeper into the forest, and the undead followed behind him, holding their weapons at the ready. Some time later, in a different place in the forest, someone used a war shield and ordered the others to retreat. These people were fighting a huge boar whose eyes seemed to glow with rage, and without paying attention to the spell aimed at it, the monster ran forward, raising clouds of dust into the air. Ajay, holding his shield in front of him, took the boar's blow and, crying out in pain, clenched his jaws, closing his eyes, and asked where the monster still had strength from. Xiaoyan, standing behind him, asked him to wait, and promised that she would give him a potion now. She activated her magic, enveloping him in an aura, and at that moment Yanran, with her hand out to the side, activated a fire fist, and her palm was surrounded by fire. The flames gradually grew, enveloping the boar, and as the monster was consumed by the flames, screaming, Ajay and Xiaoyan hid behind the shield to avoid being attacked by the fire themselves. Finally, the system announced that their team had defeated the level 3 armored boar, and thanks to this, they gained 100 experience points and reached level 2. Yanran sighed happily, exclaimed that they had done it, and although it took a lot of effort, they had finally defeated this monster. They had assumed that their small team would be able to deal with level 3 monsters even on the first day of the trial, and Ajay was glad that they had so many healing potions, because if there was no healer nearby, he would not have lasted so long. Yanran, who had risen to level 2, crossed her arms and exclaimed that these were only level 3 monsters, declaring that she would encounter level 5 monsters before the end of the trial. Xiaoyan, the second level healer, looked at her with a worried expression and said that the higher the level of the monster, the more complex the strategy would be, and for a level 5 monster, at least 1 level 5 warrior and 2 level 4 supports would be needed. Ajay, who was a level 2 combat shield, closed his eyes and laughed nervously and admitted that, to be honest, it would be good for him to take the minimum level 3, since his family hoped that they could earn their living that way. Suddenly, the ground shook and Ajay, Xiaoyan, and Yanran froze and asked what was going on. They were shocked and a little scared by the sudden earthquake, but they realized that it was not an earthquake, suggesting that something was coming. Suddenly, they noticed a monster appearing above the treetops, and as it got closer, they realized that it was a level 6 Stone Ape. Raising their heads, they looked at this monster, frozen in fear, and frowning, Yanran shouted that it was a level 6 monster. Ajay suggested that they split up, otherwise the monster could catch them all at once, and turning around, he began to run away with Yanran. However, Xiaoyan, falling to her knees, looked at the stone primate in horror, exclaiming that her legs did not obey her. Hearing her cry, Yanran and Ajay stopped, turning towards her, and she screamed, and paying attention to her, the monster slightly narrowed its eyes, preparing to attack. Seeing this, Yanran excitedly shouted Xiaoyan's name, and Ajay, running forward, shouted that he was already coming, and crouching on the ground in front of her, put out a shield forward, covering her with it. She looked at him with wide eyes in confusion, and he, clenching his jaw and sweating from the tension, frowned, mentally asking her not to be afraid, as every professional faced this. Xiaoyan closed her eyes, and he remembered how some time ago, waving his hand in farewell, he asked his mom and dad not to worry, as he was going to become an official professional, in which case the state would pay them an allowance, which consisted of a fairly large amount of money. Ajay's mother noted that the main thing was that everything was fine with him, and he, smiling, asked his parents to take a look at his armor and asked if they had seen such armor on anyone. He laughed confidently, and now, holding Xiaoyan close with one hand, shouted that he would not retreat, as the protection of this world lay with him. The monster at this moment began to forcefully bring its fist down on them to destroy them, and when its hand came down, a huge amount of dust rose into the air, causing Ajay and Xiaoyan to be invisible. Yanran, looking at the dust in horror, excitedly shouted out the names of her comrades, and the monster suddenly froze in amazement, warily peering into the dust below it. Some time later, when the dust finally cleared, everyone noticed that the undead, with its scythe extended forward, stood in front of Ajay and Xiaoyan, stopping the stone primate's fist with its own weapon. Ajay peeked out from behind the edge of his shield, frowning in confusion, and asked, "What is this?" Xiaoyan, although she did not say anything, also looked frightened and surprised, and carefully looked at the undead that protected her and Ajay. Changfeng, who had appeared behind Yanran, admitted that he didn't think so, and she, hearing his voice, frowned, turning around, and saying his name in shock asked, where did he come from? Answering this question, he declared that it was the duty of a professional to protect those he chose to protect. At this moment, his undead, swinging his scythe above his head, rose forward, destroying one of the stone primate's arms, and the monster, roaring, placed its remaining arm on the place where the other arm of this one had been just a moment ago. Yanran, with her eyes widened, asked what was going on. She was astonished that the undead had defeated a level 6 monster with one blow, and the stone primate, meanwhile, noticing that the undead was approaching, turned around, retreating deeper into the forest. Yanran pointed her hand towards the monster, shouting Gangfeng's name, and turned around, wanting to ask what he had just done. However, she noticed that he was no longer standing behind him, and asked in amazement, where was he? Frowning, she remembered that the creature holding the scythe was the creature that the protagonist had summoned that day during the profession change ceremony. She was astonished that this undead creature had easily defeated a level 6 monster, and she asked if Gangfeng was hiding his true strength again. She wondered what level he was at now. In the end, distracted from pondering this, she began to run towards Ajay and Xiaoyan, excitedly asking if they were okay. As Ajay stood up, he extended his hand upward, replying that they were fine, but admitted that he might need new pants. Hearing this, Xiaoyan shuddered and looked at him with a frown, moving away, and noticing her reaction, he scratched his hair with his hand, nervously explaining that he was joking. Yanran frowned and asked if they had seen Gangfeng? For a while, Ajay and Xiaoyan froze, thinking, and finally he pointed his finger to the side, saying that they had indeed seen the protagonist, and announced that he had chased the stone ape in that direction when the monster left. He remembered how some time ago he noticed Gangfeng running in the direction where the fallen trees were visible from where the stone ape had passed by. Suddenly, Xiaoyan raised her finger, pointing out that the creature similar to the Reaper from the movie had injured the monster very badly, and asked if the protagonist was going to finish off the stone ape. Ajay turned to look at her and exclaimed that of course it was, reminding her that it was a level 6 monster, and asked Xiaoyan to imagine how many experience points Gangfeng would receive for killing this stone ape. Listening attentively, Yanran frowned, and then asked if they had been to the job change ceremony. She wondered if they remembered the main character's job, and upon hearing her question, Ajay exchanged glances with Xiaoyan and remembered that he was an undead summoner. Xiaoyan also repeated the name of this job, and at the same time, looking at Yanran, they both asked in confusion, what did this all mean? She frowned even more and noted that although it was hard for her to admit, it could be that Gangfeng was much stronger than they could imagine. The main character at this time, frowning and clenching his fists, walked through the forest until he finally reached a stone cliff, on the edge of which the primate stopped. He declared that high-level monsters were limited by strict spatial boundaries, and that was why a level 6 monster could not leave the central area. However, this stone ape managed to do so, and on top of that, it was deliberately heading towards Gangfeng. He wondered who had given the primate such an order, and upon hearing these words, the monster turned around abruptly, looked at him, and simply growled. Closing his eyes, the protagonist frowned in annoyance, realizing that the monster would not tell him this on its own, and so he decided that now was the time for advanced spiritual destruction. Opening his eyes, he activated mind reading, and when his skill was directed towards the monster, the stone ape narrowed its eyes, and Changfeng, finding the right moment in the monster's thoughts, noticed that in the cave surrounded by a dim glow, someone furiously asked, "Who destroyed this one's magic contract?" The evil child guessed that this time the insignificant bunch of people had brought someone worthy, and calling out to Shangxiao, it ordered it to bring that person to this one. Turning to the protagonist, the evil child asked him to wait for it, as soon as he, like those foolish people, would become one of this one's subordinates. Looking closely at the silhouette of this monster, Changfeng noticed a shining symbol on this one's chest, and when he stopped the effect of his skill and returned to reality, he noticed that the same shining symbol had appeared on the forehead of the stone primate, and the ninth evil child, speaking through his subordinate, slightly bowed his head and asked, "Was it Changfeng who killed this one's best servants?" The protagonist was astonished when he heard the monster begin to speak, and guessed that the evil child was the one behind all this. He frowned seriously, and the monster announced that a person who had only reached the 5th level was able to defeat Shangxiao, and asked if it was with an ability that affected the mind. This monster was sure that such a move would not work on it, since it was a king-level monster. Frowning but grinning, Changfeng decided that defeating it would give him a lot of experience, and the child of evil, bending closer to the ground so that its head was at the level of the protagonist, laughed, asking if he thought that as long as this monster was in charge here, it could do whatever it wanted. It asked him to wait, and warned that it would soon fulfill its great plan, and when it ruled over people, Changfeng and his friends would be a delicacy to this monster. Clenching his hands into fists, the protagonist asked what the monster said. He activated the magic to summon the undead, and it swung its weapon and split the stone ape's head into two. Frowning menacingly, the protagonist admitted that he hated being blackmailed by those close to him. However, even though the primate itself had been destroyed, the child of evil that possessed its mind still had the ability to speak, and through the magic symbol, it asked, did Changfeng think that after killing a level 6 monster, it would be able to compete with it? It promised that they would all die once it won, and at that moment, the system announced that the protagonist's undead had killed the giant level 6 stone ape, and thanks to this, it gained 100 experience points and advanced to level 6. Because he had reached the required level, the supreme arrow stimulation began to activate, and Changfeng's body was surrounded by dark magical smoke, and he, unexpectedly, opened his eyes wider, but did not say anything. The amount of magical energy around him increased, and spread so far that it was noticed by Xiaoyan, Yanran, and Ajai, who were a little to the side. Looking at it in fear, Xiaoyan, clutching the staff she used as a weapon, asked what kind of black smoke was this. Yanran, warning that it was impossible to see anything because of it, advised her comrades to be careful, and Ajai, looking around in fear, clung to his shield, ready to use it if necessary. When they walked a little further, Yanran suddenly stopped, frowning, and cried out in amazement. Ajai and Xiaoyan also froze, mimicking her expression, and this was because they noticed the silhouette of Changfeng, towards which a huge monster bowed its head, opening its jaws and revealing sharp fangs. The protagonist, continuing to watch the monster that appeared in front of him in shock, said intermittently that this was a true ruler, and even opened his mouth in amazement. At the same time, in the sky above the city, outside the place where the evaluation event for the guys was taking place, a flexible body of a huge monster appeared, and noticing this, some people drew the attention of those near them to the sky, asking them to look, and asking what is this. Some guessed that it was a giant dragon, and hearing this, some asked, is this really an invasion of monsters? However, the other townspeople reassured these people, exclaiming that this was impossible since there were so many awakened people in the city, and there was no way that monsters could get in. But despite this, they still assumed that they needed to find shelter, and Su Keqing, who was standing behind the crowd of people, adjusted the hat on her head, smiling slightly, and wondered if this was the second awakening. In her opinion, their former classmates from Daoqing High School were not bad, and she turned around and began to walk away from the people, regretting that she had to leave the city, since she would have loved to meet these students. At this moment, one of the men next to the portal asked, how was it going? He wondered if the portal hadn't started working yet. Hai, smiling enthusiastically, exclaimed that this was the first case of a second awakening in the Daxia Management Bureau of the Daoqing branch, and so he decided that they needed to quickly find this person, because if the case was confirmed, they would be able to wipe the noses of the other branches. At this time, San, not sharing his partner's joy, pressed the keys on the keyboard, trying to activate the portal. He frowned in concentration, clenching his jaw, and his face was covered in sweat from the tension, and he thought with horror that all this was very strange, since usually activating the space stone would open the secret realm, but now it seemed like something was blocking it. Noticing his excitement, Hai also calmed down, looking at him carefully, and San thought that they tried everything, but the passage to the secret realm was blocked. He guessed that the fluctuations of the energy of the second awakening were preventing the portal from fully opening, and in despair, he slapped his palm on the control panel when the request to open the portal was rejected. He was afraid that this was not a temporary effect, and this only made him frown more deeply. Looking at the small cloud of energy that formed above the platform for moving, he assumed that the secret realm had closed completely, and together with Bai, he froze, not knowing what else to do. At this moment, a bright beam of energy shone in the cave, rising high to the ceiling, and the ninth child of evil, clenching his palm into a fist, grinned in anticipation, realizing that the grand sacrificial ceremony was finally completed, and now the people would not escape. The monsters standing next to this one froze, preparing themselves, and this one, pointing his hand at the beam of light, ordered those monsters to move forward, because now no one would interfere with them. This one ordered them to catch all those people, and the monsters obediently moved towards the beam of magical light, disappearing into this one. At this time, in another part of the forest, a group of students were walking through the forest, and one of the guys admired San Zhang for reaching the 3rd level so quickly. He didn't even think that his job would be so strong, and Zhang said that everyone thought that the Yanren team was the strongest, but he declared that they just didn't know what he was capable of. Suddenly, he cautiously turned around, noticing something unusual, and peering into the space between the trees, he noticed an ogre sitting in the forest, armed with a huge club. Noticing the agitated state of his partner, the other guys also turned around, and the monster, having noticed them, roared, and the guys asked in fear, "What is this?" They were terrified because they noticed a monster of the 6th level, and screamed, and the ogre roared even louder. At the same moment, in another area of the forest, the boys screamed in horror as a huge monster, threateningly looking at them, embraced them with its flexible body, not paying attention to the fact that one of the boys, trying to resist, plunged a dagger into the body of this one. Another team in a separate part of the forest stood, pressed against the trunk of a tree, as they were surrounded by monsters that came closer, and in horror they asked, "What is happening here?" They screamed in fear, not understanding where such monsters came from, because they clearly had not yet gone deep into the secret kingdom. Some other boys were already captured by a huge spider monster, and begging for help, hung on the web, wrapped in a thick cocoon, screaming in horror. At this time, on the teleportation platform to the secret kingdom, San continued to try to activate the portal, and Hai asked, "What could have gone wrong?" San admitted that he didn't know, and after hearing this answer, Hai asked why the secret realm was closed. San didn't know the answer to this question either, but he admitted that he was sure that there was some kind of power blocking the space stone symbol and preventing it from opening. He frowned and declared that if the stone was powerless, the disciples would simply not be able to get out of that place, and Hai asked sadly, would they really lose a genius locked in the beginner's space again? In the end, San slammed his laptop shut, desperately saying that they were powerless, and looking at the faintly glowing symbols on the movement platform, he realized that they could only hope that the people inside the secret realm could defeat that creature. At the same time, the system said that the Supreme Awakening had been completed, and the occupation had been changed to the Undead Overlord. Changfeng was surrounded by magical energy, and the fallen angel told him that he had obtained a unique divine skill, supreme strength, and an unbending will. Opening his eyes, the protagonist asked himself, what kind of voice was that? The fallen angel continued to speak, noting that the supreme power was that the summoned entities would gain 10 times the stats, and their skills would improve as Changfeng's level increased. The unbending will was that damage to the protagonist himself would be transferred to the summoned entities, and therefore he was immortal, because the number of summoned entities was unlimited. Looking around warily, Changfeng asked, who was speaking? The fallen angel replied that it was the spirit of the divine profession system, and explained that any person who awakened the divine profession within themselves would immediately be bound to a spirit. With his eyes widened in bewilderment, Changfeng repeated the fallen angel's words about the divine profession system, and even opened his mouth in bewilderment, and the spirit announced that it was called a fallen angel. The protagonist repeated the name of this one in amazement, and asked if other people could hear the angel? It replied that only the undead overlord could hear its voice and give it orders in his mind. Paying special attention to the word order, Changfeng asked what the fallen angel could do. He walked through the forest, studying his new abilities, and the angel announced that with the protagonist's current access, it could scan the area within 500 meters for signs of life, and asked if it should start scanning. Changfeng guessed that the access depended on his level, and frowned, ordering the fallen angel to start scanning. The spirit was silent for a while, and finally announced that the scan was complete, and within 500 meters of Changfeng's geolocation, there were signs of life, the number of which was 4. The protagonist guessed that the 3 living people were the Yanran team, and the other one was, according to his guess, the enemy. He asked if the fallen angel could tell him more precisely. It declared that it could not discern specific signs of life, but added that Changfeng could use the power of the vengeful spirit of the undead to analyze it in detail. Hearing about the vengeful spirit of the undead, he asked in surprise, assuming that his undead had increased in level. He extended his hands forward and activated the magic, and several monsters appeared in front of him, and he waved his hand and ordered them to investigate the area. The undead immediately headed deeper into the forest, spreading throughout it, and Changfeng, having fallen to the ground, decided that he would try out a new ability next. Frowning in concentration, he closed his eyes, moving into the body of one of the undead, and sighed in surprise, asking himself, did this mean perceiving feelings? He looked at the body of the undead, surprised by what had happened, since before he only gave orders to the undead, but now he could directly control it by exchanging bodies. He assumed that this undead could be considered his avatar, and continued to explore the area, asking if there was a problem. The thing was that he noticed that one of the undead froze excitedly, reacting to the change in the surrounding area, and when the monster moved to the side, Changfeng noticed that a fire had appeared in the forest, realizing that these traces were left by Yanran's team. However, they were not here, and he wondered where they went. The protagonist asked the fallen angel to scan the new area, and after a short silence, the spirit announced that there were no signs of life. Astonished that the number of living people in this area was 0, Changfeng frowned and, remembering that less than a minute had passed, asked where Yanran and her team could have disappeared to. He assumed that they could have gone, but he realized that it was very difficult to move so quickly in this dense forest. In the end, he decided that it didn't matter who won that fight, there should be traces left on the ground, but there were none here, and the guys seemed to have disappeared. While he was thinking, the undead under his control continued to explore the area, and Changfeng realized that people were simply disappearing, assuming that something unusual helped this, and asked himself, could it be that this was all the fault of the creature that all these people encountered? Getting up, he ran further into the forest, thinking that Yanran was a fire mage after all and a professional, and on the outskirts of the secret realm there were only low-level monsters that would not harm her team. Suddenly, he realized that there could be another possible scenario for this situation, and frowning even more and clenching his jaw, he remembered how the child of evil asked, did he really think that as long as this was the main thing, he could do whatever he wanted? The monster then asked him to wait, promising that it would soon carry out its great plan, and when it would rule over the people, Changfeng and his friends would be a delicacy for this monster. He also recreated in his mind the image of the symbol that was visible on the body of this monster, and now the protagonist froze, furious at what had happened. In the end, he still went forward, realizing that judging from the words of this monster, it was the child of evil who ruled this kingdom. Remembering that it was going to rule by carrying out the great plan of rebirth, Changfeng asked himself, what was this monster trying to achieve? He understood that if the 9th child of evil was targeting the people in the secret realm, then sooner or later it would reach him too, and so, activating his skill, he made it so that a large number of undead under his control appeared in the forest, and since the enemy was not visible, and he himself was as if in the palm of his hand, he decided that it was better to find the enemy first and attack. And for some time he sat on one knee, pressing his palms to the ground to summon even more undead. As soon as the monsters appeared, they immediately began to disperse in different directions, carefully looking around and analyzing the situation. Finally finishing with the summoning, the protagonist frowned, pointing his finger forward, and ordered his undead to clear the entire secret realm, warning the monsters not to miss a single move. He also told them to kill all the monsters that they encountered along the way. Some time later, Xiaoyan, hearing someone repeating her name over and over again, slowly opened her eyes, sighing painfully. Ajay, leaning over her, excitedly repeated her name, telling her to get up, and looking at him, she also noticed that Yanran was also standing a little to the side, looking restless. Looking around, she carefully stood up, and Yanran helped her stand still, and she asked where they were. Yanran admitted that they had also just come to their senses, and asked if Xiaoyan was injured. Ajay, looking at the other guys who were also in the huge cave, noted that it seemed like everyone was there for the evaluation. The guys approached each other, asking if everyone was alive. In addition, they were curious about whether the others were okay, and inquiring about this, the guys and girls talked to each other. Someone was shouting that they had lost their bag, someone was admitting that they had already said goodbye to life, and some were assuming that they had been teleported. Suddenly, a loud voice invited all these people to this place, and the boys and girls began to look around, asking each other if the others had heard this voice. They were wondering who was speaking, but they were unable to find an answer to this question, because suddenly they noticed that a red light had appeared in the dungeon, and, moving away from the edge of the platform on which they were standing, the guys asked in horror what was happening. Looking at the huge statue towering over the neighboring platform, they assumed that the sound was coming from this huge boulder, and someone began to ask what kind of place this was. In addition, they were wondering if this was the voice speaking, and while they were talking, a large number of monsters surrounded them from all sides. The ninth child of evil, the secret boss of the royal level, looked at the frightened boys and girls, declaring that this stone statue was the protector of the altar, and asked the people to look back. The boys obeyed, looking to the side, noticing the monsters approaching the edge of the platform, on whose foreheads the symbols of submission shone. They were curious about what kind of monsters these were, and while chatting, someone suggested that the evil child was the boss of the lair. They were especially shocked that this monster could talk, and so they asked where this monster came from. Such bewilderment was due to the fact that they had a regular exam, and in this, the evil child, attracting the attention of the guys, shouted that people were invading here again and again, killing the people of the ninth evil child for decades, and it asked, do they really think that it will not be angry? The girls and boys froze in fear, opening their eyes wider, and the monster, pointing his finger towards the statue with a sorrowful expression on his face, declared that it was great and merciful, and ordered the guys to take an oath of allegiance, promising that in this case, not only will their sins be forgiven, but also grant them the power of the Lord of Evil. After repeating the monster's words about the evil lord's power, the girls and boys began to talk among themselves, remembering that this was a monster from history books that had made a contract with thousands of people, turning them into its power. However, they thought it was nonsense, since such monsters had died out 100 years ago. The child of evil, smirking, announced that it had recreated the altar in the place where the evil lord was born. It also added that if the boys stepped on the altar, they would be able to make a contract with the Lord and gain its power. Finally, he shouted that everything would be in their hands, and suddenly Yenran, crossing her arms over her chest, looked at the monster with displeasure and shouted that this was nonsense, asking why people would serve monsters. She wondered if the child of evil was so strong, why didn't it step on the altar itself and gain this power? Hearing her voice, the boys standing nearby turned around, looking at her in surprise, and the ninth child of evil, stretching out his hand, announced that it had already acquired part of the power under the contract, and pointing to the monsters that the students saw here, it explained that these monsters were now serving it. However, it also noted that this was only a small part of the evil lord's power, and only humans could obtain it in full, because the evil lord himself was once a human. After saying this, the child of evil turned his gaze back to the statue, and the girls and boys asked in shock, assuming that this was a joke, since they did not understand how such a cruel creature could be a human. In addition, they did not know why a human would need to subjugate his own kind. Yenren was indignant when she heard the monster's words, and it, raising both its hands up, answered the people's question, shouting that what made the evil lord submit to the people was hypocrisy and envy of someone who was stronger, and so the monster asked if all people were the same? It thanked the people, because it was thanks to their stupidity that the demon race had raised such talent. Returning its attention to the boys and girls again, the child of evil asked if they would decide to live or die. It wondered if they had already made their choice, and looking at this, everyone frowned, dissatisfied with the choice offered. Lu Liang was among the people who lowered their heads. However, he thought seriously and suddenly turned around, heading towards the stairs leading to the altar. His comrades looked at him in confusion, and one of the guys standing closer put his hand on his shoulder, stopping him, and asked where he was going. Liang announced that he was going to the altar and asked why not try it if it would help him become stronger. But before he could continue walking, the stairs suddenly exploded and he closed his eyes, turning away from the bright light. After that, he turned around, frowning in annoyance, and focused on Yenran, who looked at him seriously and pointed a finger that still had fire around it from using the skill earlier, asking if he was an idiot. She reminded him that humans and monsters were incompatible and asked if Liang really thought that the monsters brought them here to make them stronger. She was shocked that he would go there knowing that it was a trap, and hearing her words, Liang chuckled, noting that sooner or later guys with such rare jobs like the others would become strong, but for him, an insignificant swordsman of the fighting type, this would not happen, and his future would not change even if he survived in this dungeon. Everyone listened attentively to his words, and he, turning his back to the others, added that he suddenly had a chance to change his fate, and even if it was a deception, he was willing to risk his life. Ajay, approaching Yanran, realized that it was all useless, and Liang would not listen to her. She frowned, looking after Liang, and he, having reached the edge of the stairs where it collapsed due to the explosion, jumped to the other side, approaching the platform, and landing on the altar, he announced that he had never gotten such a lucky ticket before. Red energy began to appear around him, and he looked at the face of the statue and asked to be allowed to be the main character for once. Watching him, the ninth child of evil chuckled, and dark red smoke began to emerge from the mouth of the statue, enveloping Liang's body, who, looking up, asked for power to come to him. Very soon, his body was completely hidden by the fog, and he shouted that he felt his body being filled with this power. Some time passed, and he laughed, and in the gradually dissipating fog, the other guys saw that his body had changed greatly. He turned into a fallen demon swordsman of the 7th level, and lowering his head, he looked at his powerful hands, on the fingers of which there were sharp claws. The guys, watching him, noticed that he really became stronger, but with horror they realized that his appearance had changed greatly. As they all stood there, frowning and gaping in amazement, the ninth child of evil announced that the next step needed to be taken, ordering Liang to prove his loyalty to the great Lord of Evil. Liang, smiling, asked how he should do that. He frowned with determination, and the child of evil, opening his mouth wide, shouted that of course he had to kill all these people. Liang, not resisting, pulled out the sword from behind his back and looked at the frightened people in front of him. Raising his hand with the weapon up, he laughed with a confident frown at the sword, and the boys, trying to reason with him, shouted his name, reminding him that monsters had destroyed their homeland. They asked if he really wanted to betray people for monsters? Someone tried to convince him that the professionals would not forgive him for this, but at that moment the ninth child of evil, grinning, called Liang the successor of the Lord of Evil, asking him to give people a taste of this fear. One of the girls suddenly, putting her palm to her chest, attracted Liang's attention, noting that her father worked in the Chinese bureau, and she promised that she would report everything to her father if Liang helped these monsters. She advised him to retreat, kill all these monsters and pull them out of there, and he, looking cruelly at her, approached her in one jump, and she, screaming, pulled away, looking in horror at the floor cracked in the place where Liang landed. He, raising his head, narrowed his eyes, looking at her, and assumed that the information had not yet reached her. He swung his weapon, and the force of the blows sent the girl screaming and flying up. Everyone standing nearby widened their eyes in horror, asking what was going on. They were terrified that Liang had actually killed the girl, and he, meanwhile, raised his head up, declared that he could not stand such arrogant people, and added that he was the boss here now. The guys standing closest to him moved away, trying to get as far away from him as possible, and almost instantly everyone panicked, and, sharply turning around, the guys and girls began to run away, hurrying each other. They realized with horror that Liang had really decided to kill everyone here, and, looking back at him, they shouted that he had gone crazy. Yanran, trying to stay in place, asked everyone to stop, as she was sure that the only way to survive was to combine their forces against Liang. However, a guy running past her shouted in horror that this was not so, since Liang was on the 7th level, and asked how they could fight him. Many of the guys had already run to the opposite edge of the platform by this point, and unable to hold on, some screamed and fell down. Someone managed to cling to the platform, hanging on to the edge and begging for help, and the rest, stopping, warned their comrades to be careful, since there was nowhere to run. Pleased with the despair of the others, Liang laughed, running between the guys, and waving his sword, he dealt them fatal blows, from which they fell to the ground. Swinging his weapon once again, he shouted that this was exactly the strength a swordsman should have, and directed several blades that appeared in front of him, ordering the rest to die. The blades pierced the students trying to escape, and screaming, they fell to the ground. Some began to scream, realizing that the same weapon was approaching them, and one of the girls, unable to control her body, fell to the ground, screaming louder than the others. But suddenly, before the blade reached her, a ring of fire surrounded her, taking the blow of the weapon, and squeezing her eyes shut, the girl screamed again, and Liang, frowning and clenching his jaw, turned around, asking what was happening. Noticing Yanran, who stood there, frowning seriously and casting a new spell, he furiously shouted her name and raising his sword, released a large amount of magical energy, ready to strike again, and declared that he had long tolerated Yanran's arrogance, and asked if she could now outshine him? He was amazed at her rare profession, and mockingly calling her a genius, he declared that at the second level she would not be able to do anything. He ordered her to die as he aimed an attack at her, and she activated her phoenix armor, covering herself with a wall of fire. But although her shield took the brunt of the attack, Liang's attack still broke through, damaging Yanran as well, and she screamed and flew away. Ajay managed to catch her, excitedly calling out her name, and Xiaoyan, running closer, also looked at her in fear. Yanran closed her eyes without answering, and Liang, carefully examining her, asked if this was really phoenix armor. He knew that such a level 6 item was rare, but he warned that it would not stop him. Swinging his weapon to deliver another blow, he laughed and asked, "Who else wanted to fight?" Ajay asked in fear, "What should they do?" He drew Yanran's attention to himself, noting that they were failing, and she, not allowing him to panic, ordered them to buy time until help arrived. Looking at her desperately, Xiaoyan noted that everyone was locked in here and no one would be able to call for help. However, stepping forward, Yanran stubbornly frowned, exclaiming that not everyone was locked in here, because Changfeng was still outside. At this moment, a monster approached the cave, flying inside, crossing the barrier, and feeling this, the protagonist's eyes widened and, realizing what kind of phenomenon this was, he asked himself, was this really a barrier? Now he understood why he still hadn't found the guys after searching the entire dungeon, and confidently looking in front of him, he noticed that this cave was hidden deep, which meant that this was where the monster that had done all this was. Now he was happy that he could track the monster by the mind mark due to the fact that he had raised the spiritual destruction to level 8. At this moment, the 9th child of evil turned around and asked in surprise, "Did this one's ward dare to return without permission?" The monster screamed several times, and the child of evil, understanding the message of this, asked in amazement, "What does this mean?" He was outraged that there was a person of the 8th level outside who had dealt with all the demons. Cursing, he noted in annoyance that Changfeng dared to kill all his servants, but decided that it was not the time yet since he knew that everything would end soon. He carefully looked at Liang, who, with an enthusiastic smile, ran up to the disciples, piercing them with his sword. The child of evil urged him to kill more people and awaken the power, and Liang, hearing this, shouted that he wanted more power, and over again, he ordered himself to kill. He laughed. His appearance changed even more, and now he seemed more like a monster. Yanran, frowning and clenching her jaw, stood in front of the still surviving guys, covering them with her magic, and they, starting to talk, asked why Liang became like this. They noticed with horror that he looked like a monster, and looking at Yanran reminded her that she said that help would arrive soon, but only 4 guys remained. They all looked at the corpses of their comrades lying in front of them, and Yanran, closing her eyes, clenched her teeth tighter, admitting that she was already at her limit too. She was breathing heavily, her face was covered in sweat from the effort, and suddenly fell to the ground. She mentally turned to Changfeng, assuming that she had no chance to get past him. But at this moment, one of the walls of the cave suddenly exploded, and taking advantage of the dust that rose up, the protagonist entered, throwing his sword towards Liang. Hearing a strange sound behind him, Liang turned around, startled, and Changfeng apologized to everyone for arriving too late. At this moment, his sword, having reached Liang, pierced his body, and he screamed in pain. Dropping his sword from his hands, he roared as he fell to the floor, and the protagonist, landing on the ground, stopped in front of Yanran and the other 3 guys, and Xiaoyan, with her eyes widened in astonishment, said his name, and he, with a serious frown, turned around, focusing on the dead disciples lying on the floor. In addition, he looked at the tired expression of the unconscious Yanran, and closing his eyes, he mentally addressed all of them, apologizing since he arrived too late. Looking towards the child of evil, he called out to Xiaoyan, shouting that he was leaving the healing of Yanran to her. He was going to deal with the rest by himself, and confidently clenched his hands into fists, and Xiaoyan cried out, excited by what he said, but did not object, and at this moment, the monster, threateningly looking at Changfeng, declared that he was only a level 5 human, and asked if he knew what he would face if he killed the successor of the great Lord of Evil. The protagonist asked, was the 9th child of evil saying that he would kill the successor of the Lord? Such a question was due to the fact that he assumed that it was more likely the successor of the child of evil, and after saying this, he smiled, and the monster, angered by this, called his servants, ordering them to kill the remaining living people. Ajay, walking closer to Changfeng, noted that he knew that he was serious, but warned that these monsters were too many. The protagonist confidently frowned and declared that he would not fight alone, and Ajay, who had initially frozen, soon frowned decisively and stood next to Changfeng, shouting that he understood, promising to cover him. However, the protagonist, placing his hand on his shoulder, warned that he was not talking about him, and activating the skill, he pointed at his subordinates with his hands, explaining that he was talking about them. He motioned for his army to come, and a large number of undead appeared one after another, approaching the army of monsters, and the opponents looked at each other threateningly, and then ran forward, starting the battle. Changfeng's undead successfully dealt with killing monsters by acting together, and Ajay, smiling nervously, noted that it seemed like Changfeng's summoned creatures were defeating even these tough monsters. However, with an irritated frown, Changfeng warned that it was not that simple, and admitted that he had deliberately bluffed the boss by finding the mark of the monster itself in this monster's mind. Judging from the monster's reaction, this successor was just a trap, and so Changfeng asked if it seemed strange to others that the monster had gone to such lengths to set up a trap, but was not at all frightened by the death of the successor. Ajay asked in confusion, what mark was the protagonist talking about? He declared that most likely, the child of evil did not need a successor, but a body that could contain the power of the evil lord. Suddenly frowning, he guessed that this monster wanted to control the power of the evil lord with the mark. He frowned warily, realizing this, and noticed the shining mark on Liang's head. However, before he could continue to ponder this, the next moment, he dealt him a powerful blow, knocking him aside. Changfeng screamed and flew away, and even Ajay, who was standing next to him, couldn't stay on his feet. Noticing what had happened, Xiaoyan shouted out their names, and the child of evil laughed and called Changfeng a smart man, admitting that he was right, and explained that all these years it had been looking for a way to wield the power of the evil lord. While the protagonist coughed and spat out clots of blood from his mouth, his eyes wide in pain, the monster continued to speak, telling him that the contract would be binding to both demons and humans, and with it, it would be able to bring anyone to their knees. In order to form a contract, it was necessary to absorb the powers of each servant, and the more servants there were, the more power there would be. After briefly turning his attention to the undead summoned by Changfeng, the child of evil once again turned his attention to Liang, admitting that it was of course sad that the contractor would lose his mind, but he admitted that he had come up with a loophole, and declared that part of the power of the contract was to plant a mark on the man when he ascended to the altar, and when he completely lost his mind. The mark of the monster itself would be activated. Liang at this moment, still smiling predatorily, swung his hand, throwing Changfeng aside, and the child of evil expressed his regret that these people would not be able to see how it would collapse the boundaries of the dungeon and invade the human world. Ajay, as Changfeng flew closer to him, extended his palm forward, shouting his name, and looked in horror at the protagonist's lifeless expression and his wide-open eyes, as if looking at his emptiness. The ninth child of evil at this moment activated magic, causing the mark on this one to shine brighter, and attracting the attention of his servants, it asked the monsters to give it their own power. It was as if energy began to flow out from the monsters' bodies, approaching the monster itself, and at this moment, Changfeng, who had moved into the body of one of the undead, asked, "Does this mean that if he kills the child of evil, the mark will disappear?" Astonished by this, the monster turned around, looking at Changfeng, and waved his hand, preparing to strike him, but he used the sword that the undead was armed with to block this blow. Looking at him furiously, the monster asked, "Is it possible that he is not dead?" Frowning, the protagonist activated tenfold supreme power, and dealt a powerful blow, cutting the monster's body and ordering it to die. Although the head of the evil child was split into two parts, it still retained the ability to speak, and interrupted greatly. It asked where such power came from in an ordinary person, which Changfeng appeared to be. It gradually began to lean back, falling, and the protagonist, having returned to his body, rose up, surrounded by clouds of dust, and warned that the power of the monarch was not broken by this monster. Frowning seriously, he clenched his jaws, stood up, promising that he would become such a monarch. Ajay and Xiao looked at him in shock, their mouths slightly open in amazement, and in the place where Changfeng received a wound, magical energy was activated, enveloping it and healing the wound. Meanwhile, he clenched his fists to seem more confident in his words, and suddenly became distracted with surprise, noticing that in the place where the child of evil had stood just a moment ago, a crystal surrounded by a bright light was visible in the streams of dark magical energy. The protagonist was surprised to see this, and attracting the attention of the fallen angel, he asked if this was the item received from the boss. However, the fallen angel declared that it was a different item, and at that moment, when one of the undead came closer to the crystal, touching it with her bone fingers. Changfeng, feeling the sensation of this, asked if it was true that this energy was similar to the power of the undead. The fallen angel declared that the level of the item was above the scanning limit, and suddenly, startled, Ajay frowned warily, and, distracting the protagonist from his thoughts, shouted his name, warning him to be careful. Liang stood up and roared, his body growing in size, and he became more and more like a monster, losing the last traces of human form. He opened his mouth slightly, showing sharp fangs, and Changfeng froze, then opened his eyes wider and, cursing in his mind, realized that he had completely forgotten about Liang. Liang struck, and the protagonist managed to dodge it at the last moment. The ground cracked where the monster's fist hit, and the resulting shock wave sent Changfeng screaming and flying to the side. When he landed next to Xiaoyi and Ajay, they excitedly shouted his name, and Ajay, running closer, asked if he was okay. Changfeng, his eyes closed in pain, did not answer immediately, but eventually extended his hand towards Xiaoyi and Ajay, declaring that he was fine, and assuming that the seal on the dungeon should be released, he ordered them to leave, deciding that he would stop this monster. Looking at his undead flying towards Liang, attacking him with various weapons, the protagonist frowned and ran his hand over his chin, adding that the power of the contract had already taken over Liang, and in addition, Changfeng himself was already exhausted. That was why he ordered Xiaoyi and the others to run away quickly, and she, hesitantly stopping, looked at him, about to object. However, before she could say anything, Ajay, who had already picked up the still unconscious Yanran, shouted that they needed to run, since they were only getting in the way here. He knew that they could only believe in Changfeng, and soon they disappeared, and the protagonist continued to stand in the cloud of dust raised by the battle and watch as Liang, waving his arms, destroyed the undead approaching him. Around this time, near the transfer platform, a large number of people gathered together shouted that it had been 3 days already, asking why their children had not returned yet. They were curious about what happened, and coming close to the fence, they, remembering that the exam location was determined by the administration bureau, they shouted that they were waiting for Chi's explanation. Chi, nervously looking at the angry parents, asked them to listen, and reminded them that the exam was always carried out with increased risk. He admitted that his daughter was also inside the dungeon, and asked the people to calm down and give them some more time. Suddenly, the symbols on the platform lit up, and San, noticing this, abruptly turned around, his mouth slightly open in amazement. He warned that someone had moved, and asked the others to look, and shouted that someone had come out. She turned around abruptly, looking hopefully towards the platform, and the other parents were also alert. Running onto the platform, she shouted out Yanran's name when he noticed her, and at that moment, Ajay, Xiaoyi, and another surviving girl asked for someone to call a doctor, since they had an injured person here. Yanran was still unconscious, and the other children were sitting next to her, supporting her head. Chi, noticing Yanran's condition, shouted out her name again, frowning in despair, and San, coming closer, asked, "Where is the ambulance?" Hai said that the doctors were on their way and would be there soon, and she walked closer to Yanran and picked her up, looking sadly at his daughter, and said her name again, and Xiaoyi looked at him desperately and admitted that she had tried to heal Yanran, but her level was too low. While she was talking to Chi, San turned his attention to Ajay and the other girl and asked what happened there. He also wondered where the other students were, and upon hearing this question, the girl closed her eyes, and tears welled up in the corners of her eyes. Ajay also lowered his head sadly, not immediately saying anything about the other participants, and in the end, he closed his eyes, also unable to swallow back his tears, and declared that everyone else was dead. Hearing this, Hai, Chi, and San all asked in equal shock, "What did he just say?" They frowned, their mouths slightly open in astonishment, and at that moment, the other parents who were still standing below began to shout furiously, asking if they were there. They reminded him that they said the exam lasted for 3 days, and asked why their children were not there yet. Besides that, they were curious about what was going on, and Chi, attracting San's attention, looked at him sadly, asking him to explain the situation to the parents. San, frowning, pressed his lips tightly together, lowering his head in sorrow, and at that time, the guy, using binoculars, was watching what was happening in the distance, near the platform, and turning to Kashan, he declared that the survivors were no good for anything, and asked if it was necessary to wait for them at all. The comrade standing next to him confirmed this, admitting that he thought that the genius they knew about was studying at this suburban academy. Shan, who was a little further away from them and leaning on a small fence behind him, guessed that Kuching might have lied to them, or that guy had died in the initial dungeon. In the end, he suggested that they leave, Otherwise their brother might reprimand them if he found out that they had come secretly. However, before the three guys could leave, there was suddenly an energy in the air, and someone announced that someone was coming out. The guys froze and turned around, and the people shouted that Changfeng was coming out, who had finally returned. The protagonist was lying on the moving platform with his eyes closed, and looking at him, everyone shouted his name, asking what happened. Noticing that he was lying there without moving, someone asked in horror, "Did he really die?" Ajay, San, Hai and the others looked at Changfeng in shock, and Ajay ran closer to him, asking him to hold on. San frowned and confidently declared that they could still save him, at which point the protagonist opened his eyes and said that he was alive, and upon hearing this, Ajay and San froze, opening their eyes wide. After calming down a bit, Ajay asked if Changfeng had defeated Liang, who had turned into a monster. The protagonist painfully closed his eyes and sat up, admitting that he had not defeated Liang, as humans were unable to defeat this demon. He was sure that he was lucky that the monster did not have its own will, otherwise even 10 lives would not have been enough to defeat it. Recalling how his undead held Liang, preventing him from escaping from the hail of stones, Changfeng said that he had only been able to imprison this monster in a cave. Frowning, San shouted out his name and asked if this meant that he had saved the surviving boys. He assumed that the protagonist had undergone the second awakening in the secret realm, but without answering, Changfeng closed his eyes, planning to summon his skill to heal himself. However, he suddenly froze, opening his eyes and frowned, pressing his lips tighter. Opening his eyes wider, he realized that someone had launched an attack on him, and because of this, it was impossible to summon the undead. Turning to the fallen angel, he asked, "What's going on?" The fallen angel declared that after casting the forbidden demon effect, mental power would be blocked. Changfeng stood up abruptly, frowning even more, and asked if his power was being blocked by someone. Seeing his sudden movement, San leaned back a little and looked at him in confusion, and the protagonist mentally repeated that he had the forbidden demon effect on him. Narrowing his eyes, he began to look at the people standing below, and asked himself who was plotting against him, and why. In the end, San also stood up, frowned warily, and walked closer to the protagonist, placing his hand on his shoulder and asking what happened. Changfeng abruptly turned towards him, not expecting such a show of attention, and finally said that nothing had happened. He looked to the side a little, slightly closing his eyes, and mentally noted that this was strange, since the feeling he felt suddenly disappeared for some reason. After apologizing, San drew his attention to himself and announced that he needed to see a doctor, adding that he wanted to ask Changfeng some questions before that. The protagonist did not argue with this, and someone interrupted him and said that they needed to explain themselves in front of everyone. Some time later, when night had already fallen and the moon had risen in the sky, the protagonist, with his hands in his pockets, walked home along the street lit by lanterns, thinking that the interrogation was finally over. He thought that they would crack him like the police, but he remembered that in reality, everything was completely different. Closing his eyes, he mentally returned to a time ago when San, sitting next to him at the table, asked if he was talking about the heir of the child of evil. He wondered if there really was such a monster in the secret kingdom of newbies. He wrote down everything he heard on a piece of paper in front of him, and during this entire conversation, Hai, who was sitting next to them, was watching Changfeng with excitement. As San continued to question him, he guessed that there was some external force at work within the monster, otherwise a mere level 10 monster would not be able to do such a thing. He felt sorry that the secret realm could only be sealed as a whole, and suddenly Changfeng, drawing San and Hai's attention, asked if they had any doubts about the truth of the story. San replied that no one could lie in front of a soothsayer, and turned to Hai and asked if that was true. Hai simply laughed with his eyes closed, and at the moment, smiling slightly, Changfeng thought that he was a monarch with powerful spiritual power, so the art of mind that Hai possessed would not work against him. Although he was basically telling the truth, his intuition told him that he couldn't talk about something that emitted a necromantic aura. As he thought about it, he mentally recreated the image of the stone he had found, but he was suddenly distracted and heard someone calling out to him, exclaiming in displeasure that he had made himself wait. Changfeng quickly turned around and saw someone raising a weapon to attack him, and with a wave of his hand, the protagonist summoned 2 undead creatures armed with shields, who stood in front of him and took the blow. Qin Shan smiled in surprise and asked, was it possible that he had summoned creatures with level 13 attributes at level 10? In addition, he noticed that Changfeng had summoned 2 such creatures at once, so he guessed that he really wasn't a newbie. His comrade, who was recording everything on his phone's camera, smirked and turned to his Qin asking if he couldn't defeat a level 10 kid. He smirked, then frowned and asked if his friend was joking. He held a dagger in both hands, asking his opponent to understand that summoning tricks were nothing compared to his skills as a level 13 professional killer. His body multiplied, disintegrating into many copies, and shouting that he was invincible. Qin and all of his copies ran forward, preparing to attack at the same time. The undead summoned by Changfeng destroyed several copies, who cried out and stopped their attack, but at that moment, Qin, who had appeared behind the protagonist, smirked and asked him to guess who was standing behind him. Frowning, he activated his magic, admitting that he did not understand why he had displeased this guy, but warned Qin to know that he had chosen the wrong enemy. He crept into his consciousness, becoming in his mind a scary monster with no clear outlines, and looking at the dark smoke surrounding him, Qin asked in horror, "Who is Changfeng?" Suddenly, Shan, ordering the protagonist to stop, warned that he was doomed, and hearing someone else's voice, he frowned, turned around sharply, and then abruptly raised his hands to his head, realizing that this was a setup, since there was an ambush here. When someone hit him, he lost his balance, fell to the ground, clenching his jaws, and Shan, coming closer, looked at Qin with disdain, noting that he could not deal with a child of level 10. He was unhappy with Qin being his ward, and while the other guy continued to film everything on his phone, Qin, whose face was covered in sweat from the tension, looked at Changfeng, who had already stood up, and drawing Shan's attention, announced that the protagonist was most likely a summoner. He was breathing heavily. Changfeng, frowning, looked at his opponents and asked who they were. Shan, looking at him seriously, gave his comrades a minute to deal with Changfeng, and Qin, standing up, held his weapon in a way that was more convenient to use, and shouted that 30 seconds would be enough for him with Shan. Hearing this, the protagonist frowned, turning around, but did not have time to do anything, and Qin, running up to him from different sides, inflicted several wounds on various parts of the body. Brandishing his daggers, he grinned in anticipation, and Changfeng, with his eyes closed, clenched his jaw, cursing as his body began to stiffen. As blood flowed out from the wounds he received, he suddenly thought that it was amazing that Shan was able to expel the demons. However, he knew that his body and mind were not in the best condition, and decided that he needed to summon a spirit. When the undead appeared a little to the side, Changfeng connected with its mind, sighed, and noticing a blue glow around him, he asked, "What is this?" While he was kneeling with his head low, Qin smirked, looked at him and asked, "Does he want more?" Meanwhile, the fallen angel announced that Changfeng had obtained the effect of the forbidden demon, and after reading about this effect, the protagonist asked, "Is this a sealing magic effect?" He assumed that necromancers could see things that humans couldn't, and using the undead vision, he noticed that Shan's eyes were the same color as the aura around the protagonist's body. That's why he assumed that Shan's ability was activated by his eyes, and with a sharp wave of his hand, he smashed the nearest lantern, causing the surroundings to become much darker. He frowned, and his partner began to look around, and Changfeng, standing up, assumed that Shan didn't need to be in sight. He moved behind Qin, who shuddered in shock, and began to swing his daggers randomly, remembering that he had injured the protagonist. That's why he didn't understand why he was still standing, since he should have died from his wounds. At that moment, the undead summoned by Changfeng swung a spear, and he announced that it was his turn, and decided that he would start with the leader, and the undead threw a spear, aiming at Shan's city. However, he did not even flinch, but only smiled slightly, because the moment the spear approached his head, a shield formed around him, stopping the attack. He admitted that Changfeng was the first one to reveal his ability so quickly, but in his opinion, it was very stupid to miss the chance to escape. Frowning, the protagonist asked what this meant. He clenched his teeth tighter in anger, and the guy holding the phone smiled enthusiastically, calling Changfeng an idiot, since Shan had a level 30 defense, and an ordinary level 10 summoner should not be able to penetrate this armor, and hearing the guy praise him, Shan smiled contentedly while covering his eyes, and then asked Changfeng to know that he did not want this, and announced that he had now changed his mind, and accused the protagonist of awakening for the second time. Frowning, Changfeng realized that Shan's power was comparable to the necromancer power under the monarch's robe, and realizing that his eyes would soon adjust to the darkness, and he would use the sealing ability, Changfeng thought that he would be in a very bad way if that happened. However, suddenly there was a notification signal left, and taking out his phone, Shan looked at it seriously, noticing that he had received a message from his brother, who announced that they should meet within an hour. Sighing, he said out loud that fortunately for the protagonist, they were leaving, and coming closer to him, Qin asked why he made such a decision. Shan crossed his arms over his chest, declaring that his brother had found out that they had returned without asking, and noted that they should return to Mount Shishan at this very moment, because Hua Qing was not joking this time. The other guy put away his phone and asked in surprise, "Don't other people need Shan's abilities?" In that case, he didn't understand why they were treating him like that, and Shan closed his eyes in annoyance, and told him to turn on his brain, calling him stupid. Pressing his lips tighter, Changfeng watched the two guys quarreling, and in the end, Shan turned his back on him and started to leave, accompanied by his two subordinates, and announced that he would let the protagonist go today, asking him to remember that no one would disturb them next time. Without saying anything, Changfeng, with his undead standing next to him, simply watched the guys leave. Some time after that, in a large office building that was the Shanghai branch of the Administrative Bureau, Chui-san was talking on the phone about how it was, and he was trying his best to calm the families down, but he noticed that nevertheless. Chui-san asked his interlocutor, what should he do with the secret kingdom? He said that there are many ambiguities in this, and it is not very good to ignore this. His interlocutor told him that if this were so, people would have faced this problem long ago. Chui-san responded by saying that this is not true and that current professionals, firstly, are not comparable to the past. He suggested that centuries-old history is not so easy to stage. Then he asked his interlocutor if this is true. His interlocutor began to shout loudly in rage about how respect is the key to the survival of humanity. Then the interlocutor ordered Chui-san not to joke with him, or else the administration will look for a replacement for him. Chui-san moved the smartphone away from his ear because his interlocutor was shouting very loudly, after which Chui-san reported that he understood. After that, the interlocutor asked Chui-san what he learned about those 5 survivors. Chui-san remembered and shouted, "Exactly." After that, he began to expressively tell about what he was just about to tell, that one newbie almost immediately rose to the 10th level. Chui-san noticed that compared to him, the Daoqing area which was under his jurisdiction was an incomparable weakness. At this time, in Changfeng's house, dark magical energy was condensing around the bright purple crystal. Changfeng looked at this and thought that of course this was not just like that, and from the point of view of necromancers, this was the true form of the stone. However, Changfeng in the form of a spirit held the magic stone in his bone hands and thought that Chui-san had previously been skeptical that a level 10 summoner could seal secret realms. Then he asked himself, could it be that the stone was to blame? Then Changfeng in the form of a spirit took out a sword from the magical dark space, reasoning that an aura was emanating from it that was similar to the aura of a necromancer. He did not know if he would be able to activate this thing. After that, Changfeng in the form of a spirit made a sharp strike with his sword, directing the sword towards the magical glowing stone. When Changfeng struck the stone remained intact, and Changfeng looked at it painfully with a shaking hand while holding his bone hand with his other hand. Then he began to look at the stone that was in the center of the room, thinking that it had not even moved. Changfeng looked at it carefully in human form with his arms crossed over his chest while several armed spirits surrounded the stone holding various melee weapons in their hands. Changfeng looked ahead tensely and shouted, "What if there were 3 of them at once?" Soon after, Changfeng's room was filled with the loud sounds of metal clanging steel weapons against stone. The neighbor who lived in the apartment below Changfeng's looked out of the window and began to shout angrily upwards, menacingly asking what he was doing in the middle of the night. He then suggested, "Are they sick?" The man then began to shout in rage that he would do something violent to those who were making those sounds. Changfeng at this time lying on the bed looked at the magic stone that he held in his hand and thought that even the power of 3 undead blessed by the power of the monarch did not cause damage. Changfeng stared at the stone in front of him and asked himself, what is the stone made of? After that, he began to reason that the spells from the books that have been tested for centuries are completely useless. Changfeng suggested that perhaps he is weak and his levels and abilities are not enough for this. Changfeng sadly looked in front of him, thinking that summoning 3 creatures is his limit for now, and he will return to this issue later. Soon after, the phone that was lying on the nightstand next to Changfeng began to make sounds. Changfeng looked at his phone but then took it in his hand to accept the call. He received a call from Chui-san, who was standing near the window holding a glass in his hand, and told Changfeng that there was information regarding his question from yesterday. After which Chui-san told him that recently people from the Huaqing University had come to the Xishan Martial Arts District, after which he clarified by saying that they had come here, that is, to Shanghai. And then Chui-san said with a serious expression that they had come for the Holy Scroll game. Changfeng asked him again in bewilderment, a Holy Scroll? Then he asked him what it was? After that, he asked him another question. Changfeng asked him if there would be participants from Huaqing. Chui San told him that this was a competition of the Huaqing Association and that usually their core members participated there, and the scope of the formation was limited, that is, high-level players competed for the Golden Scroll. Then Chui San asked him why he was asking? At this time, Changfeng, with a serious expression on his face, looked in front of him and talked about the Huaqing Association. He suggested that perhaps he would also take part. After that, Changfeng, with a confident expression on his face, said that he was going to Xishan. Chui San asked him in confusion, "What?" After that, he began to shout expressively into the phone that Xishan is an area of at least level 15. Chui San asked him in confusion, what was he even thinking? Some time after that, Changfeng stood near the station surrounded by a large number of people. Changfeng said that this is a large station and people come here to leave this city. After that, Changfeng's mind flashed back to how Chui San, with an irritated expression on his face, held out his index finger in front of him and said that if he intended to go, he must fulfill his request, otherwise he could not expect help from him. Changfeng sadly remembered those words and thought that although it was convenient for him alone, he still did not have a passport, and he could not buy a ticket to Xishan, so he understood that in this case he had to give his word. Changfeng walked between many men who were dressed in formal business suits. Changfeng said that he needed to find a man in a cowboy hat. At this time, a man with a cowboy hat on his head was loudly addressed from behind as Uncle G. Then a female voice said that she was here. It was a girl shouting who was actively waving her hand asking him to come here. Then, standing surrounded by many young people, a guy turned to Uncle G and asked him where he got so tanned. Another guy with his arms crossed over his chest turned to Uncle G and asked him if he said that the order this time would be bigger. After that, he asked him how much. The girl with a smile on her face turned to Uncle G and told him that everyone here was theirs so he could talk. Uncle G with a calm expression on his face put his hand in front of him and told them to calm down. After that he told them that he gave his word that this was the largest order since their team began to help in the search for crystals, but he said that they needed one more person. The guy with the cap on his head with an irritated expression turned to Uncle G and reminded him that he himself said that if they want to take a person into the team, then the resources are distributed differently. Then he asked him if he remembered this. Uncle G told him that he remembered this, then said that a weakling of the 10th level will not bring anything useful, so there is no need to give him anything. The guy with sideburns named Jan asked him to take someone right away, and even a 10th level? After that, he asked Uncle G to explain himself. Uncle G shouted loudly, 30%. After that, he showed 3 outstretched fingers on his hand and said that the official gave the order to transfer this child safe and sound, and then he will buy the loot at 30% more than the market value. The girl let out a surprised cry. Jan asked him, is the child related to the official? After that, the guy with the cap on his head frowned and shouted that he is against it. He reminded them that this was Xishan. He then said that protecting a level 10 weakling was the same as facing 2 level 15 monsters. Then he irritably asked Uncle G if he was laughing. Uncle G put his palms in front of him and asked him not to worry. He explained to him that if it was a calm time he would not have given his consent, but he noticed that this time the strategy was different. Changfeng suddenly approached them and asked them if he could ask. He then asked them if they were the crystal hunters going to Xishan. Uncle G and the people around him looked at Changfeng in surprise. After that, Uncle G put his hand on Changfeng's shoulder with a smile on his face and answered him affirmatively, saying that they were those very people. After that, Uncle G put his hand on his chest and introduced himself, saying that his name was Uncle G. Then he asked Changfeng what his name was. Changfeng answered him that his name was Changfeng. The guy with the cap on his head looked at the protagonist with a sly look and asked him if he was the young master who decided to join them in order to see life. Changfeng looked ahead with a surprised expression. A notification appeared on the system window that the effect of an illusory effect was recorded. Then the system window informed Changfeng that the sacredness of the monarch automatically makes him invulnerable to spiritual attacks. Changfeng confidently looked ahead and then answered the guy negatively, telling him that he is simply learning from his predecessors. Suddenly, a grimace of pain appeared on the guy with the cap on his head. He let out a painful cry. The other guys turned to him and asked him in surprise, what happened? Uncle G at that moment extended an object into Changfeng's hand, telling him that this was his ticket. Changfeng took this ticket in his hand, thanking Uncle G. The guy with the cap on his head looked ahead warily and understood that this guy is not as simple as he seems. Changfeng thought that he felt like someone didn't want him to join. He walked forward while Uncle G was hugging his shoulder, and thought that he needed to find an excuse to slip away for a while. Uncle G was laughing loudly at this moment, and saying that studying is good. At this time, Jan and the guy with the cap on his head were walking along with them angrily. The guy who was walking in front of the others turned to Changfeng and told him that when they got to Shishan, he needed to obediently follow them and not interfere with them in the process. He then added that they didn't need any trouble. Changfeng understood that magic crystals were the main materials for creating weapons and researching pharmaceuticals, and crystals of various properties were in high demand and had a high price. Changfeng realized that this was because only beings of the 15th level and above had these crystals, and ordinary professionals could not get these crystals, but only gave others who were more experienced a chance. Changfeng realized that the crystal hunters were a raiding party, that is, specialists in hunting for the crystal cores of creatures. When all 6 of them came out of the magic teleport, Uncle G said that it was good and everyone was gathered. Changfeng asked him where they were going. Uncle G told him with a smile on his face that they usually slowly search for creatures at first, but he noticed that this time they would not do that. Putting his hand to his chin, Uncle G said that he had received information that in Shishan there was one golden creature that was seriously injured. All the people around him asked Uncle G in bewilderment. Golden? Changfeng asked, what does this mean? The girl looked at him in surprise and asked if he knew. Then she put her hand in front of her and began to tell him that ordinary creatures have black crystal cores, and some rare ones have golden cores, which is why they are called golden. After that, she said that the chance of a golden scroll dropping from a golden creature is very high. Changfeng looked at her in surprise and asked himself, a golden scroll? He guessed that this was what Chui-san was talking about. Then Changfeng decided that he should go with them to have a higher chance of meeting Huaqing's people. One of the guys shouted in surprise that this means that they can sell it at auction for tens of millions. Then he opened his eyes and mouth wide and shouted loudly that if this is true then they are rich. Jan turned to Uncle G and asked him where he got this information from. Uncle G addressed Jan by name with a smile on his face and told him that he knew that he was being cautious, but he asked him if he really wanted to miss such an opportunity. Then Uncle G hugged Changfeng and said that to tell the truth, the real reason he agreed to take this guy was the gold scroll. Uncle G pressed his fist to his chest and Changfeng said that they really needed it, and besides, he had already found a buyer, that is, an official. Changfeng silently looked at Uncle G hugging him. After that, he heavily exhaled the air from his lungs looking at Uncle G. Changfeng thought that he felt that everything was far from simple. Then Uncle G holding his hand on Changfeng's shoulder shouted loudly, let's go. Another guy cheerfully raised his clenched fists up shouted suggesting that the others go forward. Sometime after these events, a loud voice shouted that everything is not so simple. Uncle G stretched out his hand in front of him stood in front of a huge eagle beast who raised his wings high and gave a loud roar. Uncle G with a smile on his face looking at the bird that put its massive beak into Uncle G's hand said that this time their target is a blue-faced viper. Changfeng looking at how Uncle G interacted with the huge bird thought that he was also a summoner. The team of young guys asked Uncle G in bewilderment, a blue-faced viper of the 20th level? Jan with a thoughtful expression on his face put his hand to his chin said that if this is so then this is really a rare golden beast. Uncle G answered him affirmatively and explained that he personally checked everything and was sure that this time things were going incredibly well for them. After that, Uncle G said that the worst thing about this viper was the infrasound hallucinogen. He explained by telling that people would not be able to come close to this viper even if they were mortally wounded, and his bird could hold back this wave. One of the guys with a cap cheerfully began to shout that this time things were really just great. He loudly rejoiced, clenching his palms into fists, and shouted that now he would be able to afford a 15th model game console. Another guy with a cap on his head asked him to calm down, and advised him to buy himself some combat gear. The girl with a smile on her face folded her palms in front of her chest, and said that she would help her parents with their business so that they would no longer work so much. Changfeng put his hand out in front of him in confusion, and wanted to say something, but the guy with the cap looked at him menacingly and shouted at him that he was not entitled to a share. Changfeng smiled and explained what he wanted to ask, then he asked when they would be moving out. At that moment, Changfeng was thinking that these two guys were really annoying him. Uncle G turned to Changfeng and told him that he wanted to remind him that creature hunting is not a child's play and a real fight is not like in the stories of old people, so from now on, he must listen to him. Changfeng looked at Uncle G with a serious expression and answered him saying that he understood him. After that, Uncle G climbed onto the back of a huge bird and invited the others to climb up too. Then Uncle G held his hat on his head and told them that they would get there by air without any problems. When the whole company settled on the huge bird, Then this bird with a sharp movement of its wings rose high into the air. Uncle G shouted that the hunters were moving out. At that moment, the lizard was watching them from under the bushes. The lizard watched how the company was flying on the back of the huge bird and then said that there were 2 people of the 17th level, 3 people of the 15th level, and 1. A certain slope that was watching what happened through the eyes of the lizard asked in bewilderment, "What?" He asked in surprise, why is his level so low? Then he noticed that he would also go because the meat of a weakling is also meat. After that someone laughed. Uncle G at that moment looked in front of him at the gorge, which was surrounded by forest and mountains, shouted that they were there. Then he advised the others to hold on tightly and informed them that they were going to land. Soon after, the huge bird landed on the rocky edge of the gorge, spreading its wings wide. Uncle G turned to the guy with the cap on his head and asked him if he took the rope. The guy answered in the affirmative. Uncle G with a smile on his face said that it was good. Then he told the others that they were going down the rope, but he warned them to be ready to fight at any moment. The guy with the cap on his head answered him that he understood him. Some time after that, when Uncle G was tying the rope to a wooden stake that was driven into the ground, he turned to Changfeng and told him that before the final boss they need to get rid of small snakes, and he found out that these snakes are at least 100. Then Uncle G said that they will not be able to take care of him, so he asked him to sit here and wait for them, and as soon as they clear the way, he will have to go down. Changfeng, who was listening to this, answered in the affirmative to Uncle G's request. Changfeng's face unexpectedly changed. He looked in front of him with wide open eyes and asked himself in surprise, "What is this?" He felt as if the stone had a reaction. At that moment, deep in the gorge at the very bottom, there was a snake of normal size, as well as one especially large snake that slyly looked up, actively moving in the depths of this gorge. At that time, the squad was descending down. The guy with a cap on his head, holding tightly to the rope, cursed loudly, shouting that there was too little space for a camp. Then this guy, perplexed, loudly shouted, "What?" The other guy asked him, what was the matter? Did he assume that he noticed someone? The guy in the cap was silent for a while and then assumed that he imagined it. Then the two of them continued to descend down. The guy who was below noticed that he twitched from every rustle. Changfeng at that moment watched them in the form of a spirit and thought that the stone would not react in vain, and something dubious was clearly happening here. Soon after that, when the squad went down, they began to look around. Then they went deeper into the narrow gorge. Jan, who was walking in front of the others, suddenly raised his clenched fist upwards and ordered the others to stop. The guy in the cap shouted in surprise, "How many snakes?" The girl with the frightened expression said that it was very creepy. In front of the squad there was a huge number of actively moving snakes. Yen, looking at these, said that they had blue and green eyes. After that he shouted that this is a sign of vipers with a blue muzzle. The guy with a cap on his head, looking warily in front of him, noticed that these were somewhere around the 10th level. Then he assumed that these were guards and somewhere nearby there was a female. Another guy told him that usually the level of guard snakes is from 12th to 14th, and the level of these depends on the condition of the female. Yen, with a smile on his face, turned to Uncle G and shouted that it looks like his information was correct. Then he loudly shouted that the deal is really profitable. Uncle G, also looking at him with a smile on his face, asked him not to rejoice too early. He explained to him that even if the female is wounded, their beast is still level 20th. Then Yen abruptly ordered everyone to take their weapons. He loudly announced to the others that the snakes were attacking. At this moment, many snakes with wide open mouths were approaching the squad at high speed. Uncle G, with a tense expression, offered his golden glowing hand to the ground. After this action, many birds began to grab the snakes with their sharp claws, attacking these. The guy with a cap on his head, clutching an axe in his hand, shouted that these are attacking. The girl who was behind him raised her staff over her head and cast a healing spell on the guy with the axe. After that, the battle began. The squad shouted loudly, ordering the snakes to die. Changfeng, in the form of a spirit, watched this battle. He thought that it was strange because small snakes have nothing but their breath, but he reasoned that he clearly caught the fluctuations of energy. Then Changfeng looked at the corpses of the defeated snakes in surprise and asked himself, "What is this?" He thought that usually once the head of the snake was cut off, the body of this snake should evaporate, but he understood that the bodies of these snakes do not disappear anywhere during the entire battle. In surprise, Changfeng opened his eyes wide, noticing that green blisters began to appear on the necks of the defeated snakes. Soon after Changfeng noticed this, these large green blisters on the bodies of the defeated snakes began to burst and thick green smoke began to spread from them, which soon filled the entire space of the gorge in which the squad was located. Uncle G, bewildered, covered his face with his hand and asked, "What is this?" The guy with the cap turned to the girl and asked her where her power disappeared. The girl, confused, looking at her palm, shouted that she did not know this. After that, she began to scream in fear that she no longer had any ability. The squad, bewildered, asked her, "What?" Yang, at that moment, coughing up thick bloody clots, screamed in bewilderment, "How did this happen?" After that, he asked, "Did the vipers have any surprises?" At this time, a large snake loudly hissed and approached the others. This snake called Uncle G by name and asked him if he was satisfied with the information he got from this. Uncle G, with a tense expression, clutching his chest with his hand, shouted out, "It was him." After that, Uncle G, with a shocked expression, asked him, "Was it he who made this poisonous fog?" After that, he asked him, "Why did he do it?" He shouted out that he paid him generously. The large snake began to laugh furiously and tell Uncle G that he did not think that he would go blind so quickly from the thirst for the golden scroll, because he was not even embarrassed by the meager information. Then the snake rose higher, sticking out its long tongue, asked him, "And now he also asks why?" Then the snake explained that he did this because he is a hunter. Changfeng, in the form of a spirit, observing the situation that had happened, asked himself again, "A hunter?" After that, he assumed that the hunter is a creature that hunts people. Uncle G, with beads of sweat running down his face, asked the snake to stop and let them go. After that, he shouted that they did not need the scroll for nothing and that they would rather take his life. A lizard crawled out of the mouth of a large snake, laughing with irony and saying that he was afraid. After that, the lizard said that, however, he did not have a chance. The squad members, watching as the gorge began to thicken, fearfully asked what was going on. The lizard explained that the guard snakes were defeated and the Snake King had awakened. After that, the lizard summed up by saying that now the boss was wounded and they were poisoned. He noted that in his opinion this was a fair fight. Then he asked if this was true. Then the lizard approached the girl and said that he was sorry that such a beautiful lady was here, but he told her that if she was ready to become his healer, he would save her. The girl looked at the lizard in fear and began to back away. Suddenly, the guy with the cap on his head cursed the lizard, making a powerful blow with his sword to the neck of this mechanical lizard. After that, the guy shouted that he had found a place to talk. After that, he said that they would see each other in an hour. At that moment, the man who spoke on behalf of the lizard said that he hoped that he would make it by that time. After that, the man laughed. He stood at the entrance to the gorge and said that in a conflict between two parties, the third party benefits, and he would take the gold scroll and the hunter's money, and that would belong to him. And then, walking forward, the hunter said that, however, he had no idea where that boy had gone. He decided that he didn't care because the 10th level wouldn't affect anything and he was too lazy to look for him. Changfeng, at that moment hiding behind a stone ledge, watched the hunter. The hunter walked away from Changfeng without noticing him. The hunter was lying on a sun lounger under a beach umbrella. Putting his hands under his head, he suggested out loud to himself to wait until the prey kills itself, after which it will be possible to collect all the rewards. Stretching out in a relaxed pose, he said, "How nice it is." Suddenly the phone that was on his chest began to make sounds. Looking at the phone screen, the hunter said, "How is that guy doing?" The interlocutor from the phone in an irritated voice addressed the hunter, calling him a poisonous lizard, and asked him what he did. The hunter replied that it was just a job. After that, he asked, why should he care? His interlocutor ordered him to listen. After that, he began to shout that he usually does whatever he wants, but now their goal is the inhabitants of Huaqing. After that, he clarified by shouting, "The International Assembly." Then this interlocutor began to speak loudly about how the plan rests on him, and he does not tie his hands. The hunter answered him by saying that what happened was the work of some amateurs and that little happens by chance. Changfeng was eavesdropping on their conversation, hiding behind a large rock. He understood that they were interested in Huaqing. Then the hunter touched his finger to the screen of his phone and asked his interlocutor if he thought that he was the boss. After that, the hunter began to shout that he joined the organization 6 months before him and sooner or later he would die anyway. Then the hunter said that he heard that there was another team in Huaqing, and they had a rather interesting little girl. After that, he shouted that it was very exciting. Changfeng, watching him, asked himself if he was a pervert. After that, Changfeng tried to step back but accidentally made a loud sound with his boot. The hunter instantly turned towards him and saw Changfeng. Changfeng cursed, realizing that he was noticed. After that, the hunter made a powerful blow to the stone behind which Changfeng was hiding. The hunter chuckled, saying that he thought that someone was missing and that's where he was hiding. The system window notified Changfeng lying on the ground that he had been dealt a decisive blow by the will of the monarch and all 3 of his necromancers were dead, and the system window also reminded him that the undead monarch with an unbreakable will still loses most of the points of mental value with each death, and if he continues to subject the body to stress, he will lose his mind. Changfeng, with a tense expression looking at his opponent, thought that he killed 5 of his necromancers, and it was the same as taking away 5 lives. The hunter turned to Changfeng and asked him why they didn't take him with them. After that, he assumed that his low level was not suitable for them. Then he laughed loudly. Changfeng looked at him with anger, thinking that there was no doubt that he was the most fearsome opponent he had ever encountered. The hunter looked at Changfeng with an arrogant expression and asked him not to shake. He explained to him that he was not interested in him as a weakling since he was only level 10. After that, he pointed his thumb to the side and told him that he was free. Changfeng walked away in surprise, asking himself, why did this happen? He wondered, why did he spare him? The hunter looked at the retreating Changfeng with a wide smile on his face. A moment later, a huge mechanical lizard appeared from the ground and threw Changfeng several meters into the air. Changfeng asked in confusion, what is this? At this moment, Changfeng was in the mouth of a huge lizard. The hunter laughed uncontrollably, asking him if he seriously believed him. Then he noticed that Changfeng was incredibly naive. The lizard's jaws closed, leaving Changfeng inside its mouth. The hunter explained to him that the moment he turned around, he had already shown his vulnerability. Actively moving, the hunter ordered Changfeng to strangle Hope with his hands. Then he laughed loudly, noticed how pleasant it felt. After that, the hunter thought about it, and put his hand to his face and noticed that, however, when he hit with full force, the guy began to seem like an ordinary person. He found this surprising and suggested that perhaps he had some kind of advanced armor and protection from magical attacks. The hunter cursed, realizing that he should have taken it first. After that, he turned to the side and decided that there was still something interesting in the cave. The hunter walked away. Changfeng, at that moment, being in the form of a spirit, suggested that it seemed to him that he had decided that he had died. Then Changfeng asked himself, who knew that everything would come to this? A notification appeared on the system window that the scanning of the mechanical lizard object was successful. Then the system window informed Changfeng that the spiritual control system can intercept control of any inanimate object. The system window wrote that the state of the object is stable. After that, it asked Changfeng, intercept control? Changfeng confidently shouted, capture. After that, Changfeng thought that now the prey has become a hunter. The lizard stood behind the hunter, who was looking down the gorge. Being in the gorge in front of a large snake monster, he loudly told the others to hold on. And then someone from the squad loudly noted that they did not have a strong player, and they could only try to wear out this beast. The snake angrily looked ahead, opened its mouth wide and hissed threateningly. The girl stretched out her hand in front of her with a tense expression on her face, and said that she could not do it anymore. The guy with a cap on his head noted that the boss's attacks simply had no end and he, too, would soon lose all his strength. Another guy with an incredibly tense expression on his face, barely standing on his feet, held his hand outstretched in front of him and swore, saying that if it were not for the poisonous fog, after which he furiously shouted out why they were so weak. A moment later, a large snake broke the barrier that all the members of the squad had previously supported, causing the fragments of this barrier to fly in different directions. Yan was thrown back by the snake's strong blow. He fell to the ground and began to cough up blood from his mouth, saying that this was the end. Uncle G shouted that he brought them here and he will get them out of here. After that, Uncle G, with the wings of a large bird that grew out of his back, rushed to attack the snake, telling it to fight him. Yan looked at Uncle G in surprise and shouted, "Old man." A moment later, Uncle G flew straight into the mouth of a huge snake. The squad members looked at this in fear and shouted, "Uncle G." Changfeng watched what was happening, levitating above the guys' heads. A moment after that, he began to emit a powerful flame stream from his eyes that hit the huge snake. The squad members watched in bewilderment as the snake was completely enveloped in many electric discharges. Changfeng, in the form of a spirit, grabbed Uncle G and carried him away. The squad members shouted in surprise that the boss was dead. After that, they asked in bewilderment, what happened? They began to shout that some shadow pierced the throat of the beast. The snake at that moment was lying on the ground without showing any signs of life, and from its body came abundant steam and smoke. The old man with a bruised face said that he was summoning, and he thought that it was not a beast or something like that. After that, he turned to the spirit and asked if he was also a summoner. Then he asked him how long he had been here and what relation did he have to this hunter. After that he asked him another question, why did he save him? Changfeng, who was in the form of a spirit, did not answer him to his questions. Uncle Ji, with a painful expression on his face, lay on the ground leaning on it with his hands. He asked in confusion, why was he talking to him? Then he thought about the fact that summoners can communicate at a distance. Then Uncle Ji, with a surprised expression on his face looking in front of him, asked, are there any more of these things left? After that, getting to his feet, Uncle Ji expressively began to ask the spirit what he said. He asked him if he was a summoner or not, and if he was the same mechanical creature. The spirit answered him that he only needed to know that he was on his side, and if he wanted to live then he needed to answer his question. By this time the smoke cleared and the rest of the squad watched as Uncle Ji communicated with the spirit. The guy with the cap on his head pointed his finger towards Uncle Ji and shouted that Uncle Ji was there and he was alive. Yang looked at the spirit and thought that this thing killed the blue-faced viper, then he asked himself what was even here. At this moment Uncle Ji addressed the spirit, saying that if he was talking about the Thunder Pearl then it was used to kill the boss. Then he asked him what he was planning to do. Changfeng, in the form of a spirit, suggested that in addition to the boss there was another enemy upstairs. Uncle Ji noticed that unfortunately the pearl was actually a tasteless weapon and it was deadly to the internal organs and even 5 or 6. But it would barely touch the outer shell. Then he guessed that it couldn't be done unless they were forced to swallow it, after which he asked, but how? Changfeng turned to the side and noticed that someone was coming. At this time, a voice came from the gorge saying that he was already coming and he addressed the squad members as friends. All the squad members with tense expressions shouted, Hunter. The hunter came out of the gorge and asked them if they were still alive. Then he noticed that they weren't even tired. Spreading his arms out to the sides, he told them that he thought it would be an unequal victory for the blue-faced viper, but he asked if they had won. Then he said that because of them, he had lost a level 20 beast. Changfeng, in the form of a spirit, hid behind the rocks. The hunter, addressing them, said that, moreover, the golden scroll did not fall out, and from this it turns out that the 20th level of the creature is not a guarantee of the scroll falling out. After that, he said that it was good that at least the crystals had a price. So he suggested that they not cry. After that, he laughed loudly. One of the squad members at that moment ran towards the crystals, calling the hunter names and shouting at him that these were their crystals. The hunter, with a smile on his face, turned to him and asked him if he was tired of living. After that, he addressed the huge mechanical lizard and ordered it to attack. The lizard did not move after the order. The hunter, looking at the lizard with a surprised expression, asked, "Is something wrong?" Then he pointed his hand towards the guy, shouting that he would do it himself. After that, bright magical energy began to flow out of his hand. He directed a powerful magical flow towards the guy who was collecting earth crystals. Soon after, there was a powerful explosion, which threw the guy back several meters. He screamed loudly and then landed on the ground with a painful sound. The hunter took one of the crystals in his hand and asked him how he could take someone else's without embarrassment. Then he laughed and asked him, "Then he is a thief too?" After that, the hunter laughed furiously again. At that moment, the huge mechanical lizard raised its steel paw and spread its fingers. The hunter turned around to look at the lizard in bewilderment. A moment later, the huge mechanical lizard with a sharp movement of its paw hit the hunter in the torso. The hunter asked in bewilderment, "What?" But in surprise he asked why his lizard. At that moment, Changfeng appeared behind him in the form of a spirit who was clutching a large metal scythe in his hands. Changfeng dealt a quick and accurate blow to the hunter's back, after which he began to scream loudly. He turned around in surprise and asked, "Another one?" After that, he asked, "Who is he anyway?" Changfeng, in the form of a spirit, looking gloomily at the hunter, answered him by saying that he was his death. The hunter, restoring his breath, looked at the spirit in confusion. The members of the squad, looking menacingly ahead, shouted that the circumstances had changed. After that, they called the hunter a fool. The hunter, with an irritated expression on his face, said that he was in a hurry. After that, he suggested that they talk and discuss everything. Then he, clutching the crystal in his hand, shouted what to do with it. He began to scream hysterically that he would torture him slowly, and he would beg for death. Uncle Ji swore in fear, shouting that this was a rare crystal that gives regeneration and it instantly restores strength. Yang, looking at the situation in surprise, asked if he would really absorb all the crystals. The hunter answered affirmatively, saying that all he could do was absorb these. After that, he began to stuff the crystals into his throat, shouting that their relics would be enough to make up for everything he had lost. Then he warned them to get ready. Changfeng, looking menacingly ahead, noticed that he was right, but he had not absorbed a magic crystal. He asked him where such joy came from. The hunter, with a painful expression on his face, choked and then fell to the ground, his whole body shaking, looking in bewilderment ahead, asking what was happening. In Changfeng's memories, a moment appeared when Uncle Ji, turning to him, asked him, that is, he wanted to use the Thunder Pearl on the hunter? Then Uncle Ji shouted that he would not be able to do this, since the Thunder Pearl was a rather weak attack item. He explained that the power of this is aimed exclusively at damaging the internal organs and it is impossible to damage the shell of the body or the monster. Then he explained that if we say otherwise then except for forcing him to swallow the pearl there is no way out. However, then he asked how is this possible? Changfeng told him that he has a way, however it is necessary for them to arrange a small show with him and besides, there is a person in their team who is able to create illusions. Uncle Ji with a surprised expression on his face asked him if he wants to say about that. By this time, the hunter was screaming uncontrollably in pain while bright rays of magical energy flew out of his mouth and flew in different directions. His body wriggled from the pain he was experiencing. Some time after that, the hunter fell to the ground without signs of life, emitting thick smoke from his mouth. Yan with a surprised expression on his face said it worked. The guy with a cap on his head noted that fortunately it worked, and he would not be able to withstand another fight. The girl lowered her head down, said that she could barely stand on her feet. Changfeng in the form of a spirit turned to them and said that he advised them to leave here as soon as possible because there was an organization behind him, and it was unknown when they would come to search. A guy from the squad shouted that this would not work and they had not yet searched the boss's lair. He said that they did not know what could be there. Yan put his hand on his shoulder and said that they did not need this and they were leaving. The guy did not calm down and continued to ask them, will they just leave? Then he began to loudly say that in the boss's lair, and this hunter definitely had some treasures left. Yan approached Uncle Ji and looking at this guy told him that they would talk about the treasures later, and the team members were very weak now so they should focus on how to save their lives. Then Yan put his hand on the shoulder of the guy who was not calming down, and said that he saved them so they would leave him the treasures as a thank you. Yan asked him not to forget that they have rare magic crystals that not everyone can afford. Then Yan noticed that besides, he asked him if he thought that in their condition they would be able to compete with his strength and ingenuity. After that, he once again suggested that the guy go. The guy calmed down and agreed with him, saying that he understood him. Then, when the squad began to move away, the guy asked the spirit how he knew about his illusory abilities. Changfeng in the form of a spirit answered him, explaining that he understood it because he taught it. The guy looked at him with fear and said taught. Then he asked when he was confused and asked him with an incredibly surprised expression, really he? He did not have time to finish because at that moment Changfeng in the form of a spirit with a sharp movement of his hand in which he was squeezing the sword struck a blow at the huge mechanical lizard. Then Changfeng, already in his own body, stepped back. He began to warm up his shoulder joints, saying that he was finally able to get out. He noticed a man lying on the ground and asked, does he look different? The system window reported that the scan was successfully completed and the target item was called a camouflage robe that changes the owner's appearance and voice. After that, the system window reported that the professional was dead and a valuable item was found in the enemy's inventory. The system window asked Changfeng if he wanted to get it. After that, Changfeng began to seek better magical energy from the body that was lying on the ground. Several notifications appeared on the system window. The first notification said that he had received a rare item called a camouflage robe X1. The second notification said that he had received several medicines as well as 50,000 Desiabi money and an X1 skill book. Changfeng looked ahead in surprise and asked again, a skill book? He wondered what it was. The system window explained that there was another way for professionals to obtain skills besides leveling up with a skill book, and skill books appear from treasure scrolls. Changfeng looked at the system window and asked, what are treasure scrolls? The system window told him that rare monsters of gold rank and above have a chance of dropping treasure scrolls that match the level when they die. And with treasure scrolls you can open skill books as well as experience books and rare materials. In addition, it is possible to obtain treasure maps and other valuables. Changfeng smiled and looked in front of him and guessed that this means that the gold scrolls it spoke of were actually gold treasure scrolls. Then Changfeng guessed that in addition, there are monsters rarer than gold rank? The system window answered him affirmatively and said that the rank of a monster depends on its bloodline, and in the current world, 75% of monsters have normal blood, 20% have gold blood, and only the remaining 5% have rarer blood. Changfeng noticed that this said that there are only gold scrolls and scrolls of a higher rank, after which he asked, Why is this a silver rank skill book? The system window said that the random skill scroll was silver grade and the effect was that there was a 70% chance of getting a random everyday skill, as well as a 20% chance of getting a random support skill and a 10% chance of getting a random combat skill. The system window replied to Changfeng by writing that the gold treasure scroll was a scroll that, when opened, revealed gold-grade treasures and possibly one item or many items. Changfeng exhaled and noticed that in other words, this skill book was only a part of the gold treasure, after which he said, "So much joy in vain." The system window explained to him that the skill-type treasure was growth treasure and that it had the lowest chance of being obtained among all the treasures, after which the system window wrote that despite the fact that it was a silver skill, however, if he got a combat skill, it would cost as much as a whole gold treasure, and if he got an impractical skill, it would most likely cost less than a silver one. Changfeng thoughtfully looked in front of him and said, "Either the best or the worst." The system window asked him, "Then what will he choose?" Then it suggested, "Open or save the value?" Changfeng shouted out that he would take the risk. After that, he ordered open. The system window showed that the opening was successful and he had obtained the skill Darkness Slice. Then the system window explained to him that the skill had been successfully adapted and the skill was available to him. And then the system window showed that the level 12 Darkness Slice has the effect of the ability of a Necromancer to dissolve into the darkness, and it is impossible to notice, after which he can make a sudden attack. Changfeng could not believe that he immediately obtained a level 12 combat skill. After that he suggested, "Unexpected luck?" Then the system window showed that this is the initial level and it is possible to increase it with the help of effect books. Changfeng closed his eyes and said that at the moment he still cannot use the 12th level and something like a skill book is too far for him. Then he began to think about the stones reacting again. He thought that it was interesting, then he asked himself, "Is there anything good in the snake pit?" When Changfeng went deeper, he found a large glowing object. He said, "It turns out that this is a snake egg." Then holding the stone in his hands he said that the reason for the weakness of the golden monster was not because of injuries, but because the egg was sucking energy from the mother. After that, Changfeng pointed his stone to the side and said, "Stone?" Soon after, the energy from the egg began to absorb the stone that Changfeng sent. A notification appeared on the system window that the experience had already reached a sufficient amount, and its level had increased to 11. Changfeng looked ahead in surprise and asked, "Does this absorb energy?" After that, he asked, "Can this stone convert energy into experience?" The system window answered him that the experience had already reached a sufficient amount, and its level had increased to 12 and the skill Dark Slash was unlocked. Soon after, a powerful explosion occurred in the egg, due to which Changfeng was thrown back. He leaned his hands on the ground and looked ahead in surprise. He shouted that his affairs were bad and the egg was resisting the stone and the cave was collapsing and he needed to get out of here. Changfeng jumped forward grabbing the stone and noticing at the same time that this was annoying and he was thinking that he could raise his level even more. When Changfeng grabbed the stone, he could not move further. He asked in confusion, what was the matter? He understood that he could not move it. Changfeng, bewildered, looking ahead, shouted that it was just a stone and that it could absorb energy only if he allowed it. After that, Changfeng, speaking to the stone, told it not to dare to contradict him. Then Changfeng proudly shouted that he was the Lord of the Undead. A moment later, a powerful explosion was heard that tore apart the entire crevice in the rock. A girl named Kiching said that someone had come. She was tied up and was in the forest. Then she shouted that someone had come to save her. She said loudly, "Her friend." The two bandits who were near her, clutching melee weapons in their hands, looked at her emotionlessly. After that, the male bandit shouted, "Enough." He said that even ghosts do not live in this remote place. The girl bandit at that moment noticed that even if heroes were found who would save the beauty, she would be the first to be saved. After that, she laughed. The bandit guy turned to his ally and noticed that she was talking as if he was a bad person. She told him that he was a villain who stole her heart. Kuching, disgusted, ordered them to shut up. After that, she said that she was sick of them. At this time, behind the bandits, a hunter was walking along the forest. The bandits turned around and with tense expressions asked, "Who is this?" The bandit girl assumed that they were reinforcements. The guy, turning to the hunter, advised him not to interfere. Kuching, with a happy expression on her face, addressed the hunter as a friend and shouted that she said that he would come and save her. Then she said that if they acted together, they could easily deal with these two. However, this man did not pay any attention to them and walked on. The bandit girl, looking at his back, laughed, saying that he was not a friend at all and he was just a passerby who did not even dare to say anything against them. The bandit guy turned to the hunter and told him to go away, after which he said that the two spirits of Mount Shishan would not kill him, that is, the rat. Keqing at this time was actively moving, addressing the hunter as a friend and asking him, "Where is he going?" Then Keqing mentally addressed the hunter and asked him if he could hear her ghostly voice. Then she called him a friend and told him that she was from Xinhua Middle School and he must have heard about it. She asked him to help her once and promised that she would not remain in debt. At this time, the bandit girl ordered Keqing to shut up and then give her things. Keqing with a frightened expression said that this time she came here with Huaqing University and then asked them if they really were not afraid of the consequences. The bandit guy asked her, "Who is she bullying?" Then he spoke disdainfully about Huaqing. Then he noticed that Mount Shishan was so big that if they hid in the thicket, they would be searched for forever. The hunter approached them from behind and asked Keqing, "Is she familiar with the people from Huaqing University?" Keqing answered him affirmatively, and said that the second largest association in Huaqing sent a raiding party to Shishan, and they needed her ghost link ability, so she was part of the raiding party. The bandits turned to look at the hunter with surprised expressions. The girl asked him if he dared to come back. Keqing continued to say with a happy expression that if he helped, she would introduce him to them. Then she explained to him that for some reason she was away. Then Keqing told him that first, however, he would have to kill those two. At this time, the two bandits clutched their weapons in their hands and looked towards the hunter. The bandit girl laughed loudly, asking Keqing if she was dreaming that this weakling would help her. The bandit girl brought her face close to Keqing's neck and stuck out her tongue. Putting her hand on her shoulder, she asked her to be gentle and give up her things so that they would not bother her anymore. Keqing let out a frightened cry and then transformed into an intangible form. The hunter girl looked at this in bewilderment. A moment later, Keqing moved to another space. The bandit girl shouted, "So I got caught." After that, she asked, "Isn't it troublesome?" She shouted that she was escaping even when tied up. Then she noticed that this time the distance was shorter, and it seemed to her that after running, her strength was almost exhausted. At this moment, Keqing with a tense and tired expression on her face was actively trying to catch her breath. The hunter watching Keqing asked himself, "What kind of ability is this?" The wolf-faced girl hunter said that she had already marked her scent and that no matter where she teleported, she would still find her. The hunter guy turned into a woolly beast and shouted that they would first get rid of the obstacle. The hunter looked ahead and mentally asked, "A wolf?" Keqing explained to him that they were level 16 beastmen and in the guise of beasts, their characteristics of strength, speed, and smell significantly increased. And then she cursed, noticing that they had really defeated her. The wolf man rushed to the attack, shouting that if they did not let him into heaven, then let him go to hell. After that, he put his claws in front of him and ordered the hunter to die. Suddenly, a spirit armed with a scythe appeared in front of the hunter. This spirit was able to repel the wolf's attack. The bandits noticed that it was a summoner, after which they asked out loud, "Insignificant to summon a 13th level?" On the system window near the spirit it was written that this was the spirit of a deceased 13th level. The bandit started shouting that he thought he was some kind of master, and he was a prince on a white horse who was saving a beauty. After that he laughed loudly, saying that he was a chick and Shishan was not a place for beginners, so he had to get away from here. The hunter said, "Level 13 or level 16, he asked if a dog could come to Shishan, then why couldn't he?" Then the hunter ordered not to bark but to come and bite him. The bandit in the form of a beast cursed furiously, shouting that he was finished. Keqing asked him in bewilderment why he was making him angry. The hunter thought that this was great, and he would be able to try out new skills. The wolf began to furiously tear the clothes on his body, growling loudly while his eyes glowed bright red. Keqing with a tense expression said that this was the second enhancement, and now his abilities had reached level 18, so he should definitely not fight him. After that, she said that he would last a maximum of 3 minutes, and they should detain him. After that, Changfeng in the form of a hunter put his hand in front of him, guiding the spirit forward. He asked with a confident expression, "Really?" Then he said that he also did not use all his strength. A moment after that, the spirit wielded a large axe and struck the wolf, who was defending himself from this blow. The wolf at that moment asked himself in bewilderment, "What?" He asked himself in surprise. His summoning was only level 13. And then how could it be so powerful? Then he thought that this was a killing aura. He decided that this was another killing aura. Immediately after that, the wolf threw the spirit away from himself with a powerful kick. The wolf girl turned to her brother and asked him, "What is he doing?" After that, she asked him, "Is he fighting a draw with a level 13 summoner?" At that time, the wolf mentally cursed, asking himself, where did the killing aura come from? He looked at Keqing and answered himself negatively. Then he looked at the hunter and thought that this was also not it. He turned his attention to the spirit and came to the conclusion that this was also not it, and the aura of murder did not come from the summoning. He asked himself in bewilderment, where did this come from? Then he began to reason that over the years on Shishan they managed to avoid imminent death time after time thanks to the keen sense of the wolf. But here there was only one summoning, he asked himself in bewilderment, then why did he feel two auras of murder? The wolf began to exhale the air from his lungs in rage. Looking menacingly ahead of himself, he asked himself, is there really another call? After that, he asked himself, where is it? The hunter with a confident expression on his face turned to the wolf and told him that if he does not attack, then he will. The wolf looked ahead in bewilderment with a confused expression on his face. He thought that it was too late, and he needed to do something. After that, he asked himself, what would happen to his sister if he died? The wolf came to the conclusion that he could only use this. The wolf, turning back into a man, fell to the ground and stood in a deep bow shouting that he surrendered. Hunter Keqing and his sister in the form of a wolf looked at him in bewilderment. The guy shouted that he surrendered. After that he explained that they say that they are a pair of evil spirits of Shishan, but in fact, they have never engaged in serious robbery and murder. He explained that it was all a bluff. The sister turned to him in bewilderment and asked why he was telling all this. The guy continued to talk about how, in addition, they were both level 16, that is, non-entities on Shishan. After that, he asked, had they not met today? The hunter asked him again, had they never done anything? After that, he noticed that they had just planned to kill a man and take the treasure. The guy asked him again in bewilderment, what? Then he explained to him that she had robbed them, and they had been chasing her all this way to return the treasure. Keqing looked ahead in surprise. When the hunter looked at her, she said in confusion that they had a terrible reputation and that she had done a good deed. The bandit girl addressed her brother by name, calling him Wan Lauer, and told him that he was a level 18 awakened wolf who had suddenly submitted to a level 13 professional out of fear. She began to shout at him in rage that in the future they should change their name to a pair of Shishan mountain panties. Lauer looked at her with a confused expression and told her that the one who takes into account the course of events is wise. He then told her that they could be called a pair of Shishan talents. His sister continued to shout relentlessly, demanding that he let her deal with them. Lauer fearfully held out his hands in front of her, asking her not to do anything stupid. At this moment, Lauer thought that the aura was killing again. This was the same feeling he had experienced before. He grabbed his sister with a frightened expression and looked at the shadow, thinking that this shadow and this shadow were wrong. After that, Lauer threw away the stuffed bag and took his sister in his arms and started running away shouting that this was the law of the streets. He asked them not to kill him since they had paid. After that he shouted that he had left them 200,000. Then he said goodbye to them at great speed running away. Keqing turned to the hunter and asked him to quickly catch up with them, otherwise they would get away. The hunter asked her, what about the law of the street? At that moment, Changfeng in the guise of a hunter accepted the bag that was stuffed with money from the spirit. Keqing told him that there was no such law. After that she asked him if he would leave them alone for 200,000? Changfeng explained to her that there was no need to chase after a cornered enemy, since no one knows what other trump cards they have hidden. After that, Changfeng, having acquired his true form, turned to Keqing. Noticing that she agreed to reveal information about Huaqing University, he asked her what he should do if she ran away. Keqing was surprised by Changfeng's transformation and addressed him as a senior, then asked him, is this his appearance? Changfeng explained to her that this robe can change appearance, after which he began to untie the rope on Keqing's body, telling her that he is not a senior but a student like her. After a while, the cheeky Keqing stroked her hands and asked him if he was also a student of Chunhua Middle School. Then she shouted that this could not be, and she had not heard of a summoner who changed classes appearing in Chunhua. Changfeng noted that although Chunhua Middle School is the strongest, this is not the only thing. Then he noted that he had also just changed classes recently. Keqing called him a liar and told him that it was impossible for an ordinary professional who had recently changed classes to reach such a level. After that, she looked at him in confusion and asked if he was the same Daoqing who had awakened for the second time. She remembered someone saying that their former classmates from Daoqing High School weren't that bad. Changfeng looked at her in surprise and asked if she knew him. Keqing chuckled, and at that time she thought that if he found out that she had used him as a shield, she would be finished. She didn't know if that person named Qin Shan had bothered him. Changfeng told her that in that case, there should be no questions about his identity, and she could safely take him to the people from Huaqing University. Keqing put her hand in front of her and asked him not to rush. Then she asked him if he wasn't curious about what kind of treasure the Shishan spirit couple was trying to take away. Changfeng answered her negatively. Keqing irritably put her finger in front of her and asked him, who is not interested in the treasure. After that, she called him a fool. Changfeng told her that there is only one treasure, but he does not think that she will give it to him, and besides, he is only interested in the Huaqing. Keqing laughed, putting her hands in front of her, and began to shout that this treasure is different from others, because it is a legendary treasure map with which you can find the entrance to a natural cache. After that, she began to talk about how this is different from the test dungeons that are controlled by people, and these secret dungeons are not explored and hide countless treasures. And then, clutching a roll of paper in her hand, Keqing said that of course the map she has is only a quarter complete, and it is not complete, and even if it is complete, entering the secret dungeon is still dangerous. After that, Keqing turned to Changfeng with a smile on her face and said that she needed a companion. Then she asked him if he wanted to be one. Changfeng turned away from Keqing and walked away. Keqing began to call him, turning to his back. Some time after that, when night fell, Changfeng and Keqing were sitting on logs near the fire talking. Keqing noticed that she forgot to ask his name. Changfeng introduced himself to her by saying that his name was Changfeng. Keqing crossed her fingers and put her chin on them, and told him that her name was Keqing. After that, Keqing turned to Changfeng and asked him if the person he wanted to know about was also from Huaqing University. Then she explained that although she had not yet been to Huaqing, she knew most of the famous people from there and perhaps she could help. By this time, 2 tents were set up behind Keqing and Changfeng. Changfeng turned to Keqing and asked her if she knew Lin Kier in that case. Keqing repeated after him, Lin Kier. Then she asked him if he also had an older sister. Changfeng explained to her that she was his younger sister. Keqing asked him again in confusion, younger? Then she asked him if he had already taken the Guokao exam. Then she looked at him in surprise and asked how his sister had done. She abruptly interrupted herself and asked him to wait, then asked if she had been accepted as an exception. Changfeng lowered his hands to his hips and noticed that it looked like that. Keqing, with a thoughtful expression on her face, looked ahead, put her hand to her chin and began to reason out loud that although Huaqing is a gathering place for geniuses from all over the country, recently there has only been one person who was accepted contrary to the rules, and that is the president of the first Huaqing club. Then she answered herself negatively, saying that it was impossible for them to have different names and that it was not her. With an angry expression, Keqing said that, however, in theory, a genius of this kind should be very famous. Then she asked why she had not heard of Lin Kier. Changfeng looked at her silently. A memory appeared in his mind of the delivery man coming to Changfeng's house and telling him that there was no address in Huaqing, so he could only return it to him. Changfeng asked, how could this be? After that, he began to shout that Huaqing University Lin Kier. The man explained to him that he had checked several times and there was no such name as Lin Kier. Then he asked him if he had remembered the name incorrectly. Changfeng, lying on the ground and putting his hands under his head, looked angrily at the sky, thinking that since then he had tried to contact in every possible way, but still had not received an answer and did not know what their plan was. However, Changfeng confidently said that if they dared to harm his only relative, even if it was them. Keqing turned to Changfeng and asked him to calm down. She informed him that Huaqing is not a den of wolves and tigers. Then she informed him that if his sister was enrolled, then she would receive an incredible amount of resources to grow. Then Keqing leaned her elbows on the ground and suggested that he was going to take the exams. Then she asked him if he was familiar with the rules of Huaqing. Changfeng answered her without looking at her that 600 points on the Gaokao and level 14 were the minimum requirements for participating in the Huaqing recruitment. Keqing looked at him with a sly look and asked if he was familiar with the unspoken rule then. She put her index finger in front of her and looked piercingly at Changfeng. After that, she told him that in Huaqing there are groups from each to a class and the differences in classes are like heaven and earth because everyone wants to get into the upper class. But in each class the number of students is fixed and one less student means one more place. Changfeng frowned and asked her if she wanted to say that during recruitment some people do tricky things. Keqing replied that they were doing something more serious. Then she shouted that they were making the competitor disappear. She explained that this happened especially often with the second awakening like him. And then getting up from the ground and shaking off her dress, Keqing said that of course if he wanted to get so many E-class then no one would consider him a hindrance. But on the other hand it was necessary to learn to cooperate. Then she began to stretch her arms saying that she wanted to sleep. Looking at Changfeng, She mentally asked him to beg her because only she from Manhwa could become his partner. Changfeng turned towards the tent and said that he was also sleepy, after which he wished her good night. Keqing turned sharply and called out to him, telling him to listen to the meaning of words and not to words. After that, she asked him if he didn't want to get into a class and if he wanted to be on her team. Changfeng told her that as far as he knew, the average number of applicants to Huaqing from Shanghai every year reached 20 and 80% of them were from Manhwa. However, he noticed that most of them were in E or B classes, and besides, in several years of taking exams, there was not a single person who passed into a class. Changfeng frowned, looked ahead and said that this was because the strong never leave their greenhouses. He explained that if they united in a group and got into the best class, then he would forever count on luck, and in their world where the strong devour the weak, this would be a fatal mistake. However, he turned to her and said that he was curious why she so strongly wanted to lure him to her side. He said that no one would voluntarily reveal their treasures to the first person they met, and also patiently explain the value of these treasures. After that, he asked her if she was afraid that he would not be interested. Then Changfeng continued to say that in the same way she was hinting that Manhwa could become his support, but he did not believe that it was out of the kindness of her heart, and finally he asked her, "Isn't this the same as another competitor for Manhwa?" Keqing was confused, and then with a smile on her face she noticed that she did not expect him to be so insightful. She answered him affirmatively, and said that she was really pulling him over to her side, but a little confused she said that she was doing this not with the current him, but with the future one who will have potential. Changfeng looked at her carefully, after which Keqing turned to the side and raised her hand above herself and asked him, "Is it really a little doubtful?" And then she said that she was also not sure whether it was an ordinary dream or a prophetic one, after which she noticed that in any case, as an illusionist of a rare profession, her sixth sense is much stronger than that of ordinary people. She seriously looked in front of herself and said that she needed to gain power as soon as possible, and she thought that the world would change, after which she said, "Many will be eliminated." Some time later, when the two of them were in the city, someone's loud voice began to shout that the 6th level fire ore was packaged and sold. After that, another voice began to shout that high-grade gems were only for connoisseurs. Changfeng looked around while walking along the street of this city. Keqing turned to him from behind and said that the city of eternal sleep was the only trading area on Shishan, and they say that this place was built by a high-ranking magician and several equally high-ranking architects. Then stretching out her hand in front of her she said that the fog can block the invasion of monsters, and over time it has become a gathering place for professionals who are on Shishan. Keqing noticed that only in this ownerless area can you find real things. Changfeng turned to her and asked her why she changed her clothes. Keqing answered him with a question and asked him if a girl needs a reason to change her clothes. After that, Changfeng turned to her and asked her where the guy she was talking about was. Then he asked her to take him to him. Keqing looked at him in confusion, noticing that he was talking very carelessly about this person, but he was a second-year student at Huaqing University, and he was an influential figure in Class A who thought he could meet anyone he wanted. After that, she said that if she hadn't been so helpful in this robbery. Then Keqing remembered and told him that he had a brother who was in debt, so he absolutely couldn't do it. Before she could finish speaking, someone addressed her from behind by name. It was Qin Shan, who was shouting loudly that she had finally returned. After that, Qin Shan turned to her and said that everything was ready for the third robbery. He asked her where she had been all this time. After that, Qin Shan suddenly grabbed her hand, ordering her to follow him. Changfeng, who changed his appearance to that of a hunter, pushed Qin Shan back. Keqing looked at him in surprise and asked herself if he had changed his appearance. Qin Shan looked at Changfeng angrily and asked him if he wanted to die. Changfeng put his hand on his shoulder and then completely removed his hand from his body. Qin Shan remarked that this was good, and it seemed like he was a professional in physical enhancement. Qin Shan looked menacingly at Changfeng from under his brows and told him that if he thought he could put on a circus in front of him, then he would show him. Keqing abruptly interrupted Qin Shan by loudly shouting his name and then asked him if he hadn't said that he had already prepared for the third robbery. After that, she asked him if he didn't want to make his brother wait, did he? She turned to the side and confidently told them to move on before they messed up the job. Qin Shan looked at her and then walked with her. He addressed her by name and said that her sudden disappearance had made his brother very angry, and of course it was none of his business. However, he said that when an unimportant person stood in front of his brother, he could not guarantee what would happen. Keqing told him that he had misunderstood and that he was not with her. Qin Shan said that it was good then. Changfeng watched Qin Shan and Keqing walk away from him. Keqing asked Qin Shan if they had found a way to attack the third level. Qin Shan told her that they had bought the basic information from a merchant and tested it, and then concluded that it would work. Keqing mentally addressed Changfeng and apologized to him, telling him that she would find a convenient opportunity to help him, and then she would find him. Changfeng looked at Keqing with a surprised expression on her face, who was mentally talking to him. Changfeng thought that the darkness slit was very convenient for dissolving into the darkness. Under his cloak were two brightly glowing red eyes. Suddenly, someone called Changfeng from behind, calling him Yadazab, and asked him what he was doing here. The girl standing behind him said that they had been waiting for him for a long time. Changfeng looked ahead in confusion with a surprised expression. Putting his hands on his hips, Lu Gu asked Yadazab where he was. The protagonist, wearing a robe that concealed his appearance, looked back in surprise, remembering how Yadazab was on the phone talking to someone. Lin Changfeng realized that it was the hunter's accomplice. When he turned around, he saw a guy in front of him with a strange metal device on his face. Lu Gu told him that their boss said that if Yadazab did not come back, the boss would treat him to lizard hot pot. He mockingly put his arm around Yadazab's shoulders, telling him not to worry. After all, he had already refused, because the lizard was quite valuable anyway. He asked the undercover protagonist with a sarcastic voice, how could he put the animal he was guarding into boiling water? The protagonist in the form of Yadazab laughed awkwardly, but then Lu Gu approached his face, frowning suspiciously and saying that every time he joked about lizard hot pot, Yadazab would make a stone face, but this time he laughed. Changfeng tensed up. He never expected that he would be exposed like this. Lu Gu began to release streams of mana, cautiously asking the protagonist who he was. This was Lu Gu's power, which was contained in the blue flames. Lu Gu stepped back, and the protagonist began to burn and writhe in pain. The system window said that the spirit of the deceased that the protagonist had summoned had fallen, and then the second spirit of the deceased that he had summoned had fallen as well. The protagonist gritted his teeth, thinking that this was level 18. He then immediately interrupted his own thoughts, objecting that this guy's ability was definitely higher than their own level. He couldn't give up so easily, so he mentally ordered himself to fight. The protagonist furrowed his brows, trying to think of what to do. However, he suddenly noticed something strange. All the fire that surrounded him suddenly began to be attracted to the magic stone that was stored in his inventory. It had only been a few seconds since Changfeng had been burning, but now all those flames were literally starting to penetrate into the protagonist's body and dissolve. The protagonist thought that this stone had worked again to absorb energy like the snake egg that time, so this time it also absorbed the flames. Lu Gu immediately started to cry pitifully, pointing his finger at Changfeng. He tearfully asked Yadazab, who was actually the protagonist, what did he do with his fire? Lu Gu tearfully yelled at him to stop doing that and release the flames. He pointed his trembling finger at the protagonist, not believing his eyes. Changfeng was lost in his thoughts, thinking that the experience increased this time was not that great. However, there was definitely some connection between the two cases. The protagonist smiled, thinking that once he figured out the logic behind the stone, he would be able to level up many times faster. Lu Gu loudly screamed, calling Aconite by name, asking her if she was still watching this show. He was screaming that he lost this time. Suddenly, a teleportation window appeared right behind the protagonist. Lin Changfeng turned around, thinking, would someone else appear there? Aconite came out of the teleportation window and addressed the protagonist, also thinking that he was Yadazab, telling him to return the bone fire to Lu Gu. In place of her face were beautiful purple flowers. Aconite also added that under Zhao's orders, Lu Gu was slightly punished as a warning for leaving without permission. Lu Gu grunted in disappointment, saying that it was a whole 3 months of his supplies. The protagonist chuckled, asking himself, has he become Yadazab now? A look of deceit appeared on his face. Aconite began to approach the two, saying that the ability to withstand Lu Gu's flames could only be his lizard clone. Changfeng looked at Aconite carefully, while Lu Gu continued to mournfully recall his fire. Changfeng then turned his gaze to Lu Gu, asking himself about the lizard clone. He realized that Yadazab seemed to be stronger than he imagined, and it turned out that he had been defeated by pure chance. Lu Gu immediately shouted that it was true. He pointed his finger at the protagonist, saying that if Yadazab was so easy to replace, then how could he join them? Lu Gu immediately said that he did not doubt him, but simply wanted to give him a warm welcome. Changfeng listened to this whole speech, knowing the truth very well. He smiled evilly, saying that it was true, adding ironically that he would not be able to return this greeting. Lu Gu said that there was no need to do so. After all, his flames were slowly growing. The next moment, their verbal sparring was interrupted by Aconite, who turned to Lu Gu and asked if his reserves would affect their next plan. Lu Gu told her that they were barely enough. The protagonist silently watched the two as they continued to talk. Aconite said that this should be a lesson to them, and then told them to go. Lu Gu kept whining as they moved forward, that his fire had eaten so many people, and this time he was finally eaten himself. Lin Changfeng watched them move forward silently, keeping a close eye on them. He frowned and thought that this woman felt scarier than Yatazab and Lu Gu. He thought that if these two were to really fight now, he was afraid that even his unbreakable will wouldn't be able to save him. The protagonist thought, the worst thing was that, judging from their voices and appearances, they were about the same age as him. On top of that, that mysterious Xiao was also suspicious. After all, there were so many geniuses, and they were all from the same organization. When Lu Gu noticed that Changfeng wasn't following them, he turned around, calling out Yatazub's name, asking why he wasn't coming with them. He told him to keep up. Lu Gu said that since they had already clashed, he should go with them on the mission. So the protagonist went with them on this mysterious mission. At this time, Su Keqing and Qin Shan were walking towards the huge fighting arena. Keqing shook her fist at him angrily, looking around. They were discussing something as they got closer and closer to the elevator in the arena. As soon as they entered, Qin Shan pressed the button for the 18th floor, saying that Keqing would find out in the future. After all, they couldn't get this thing at normal times anyway. He turned to face her and said with a smile on his face that where the highest level was 25, his brother was determined to get it. Keqing looked at Qin Shan with a skeptical look, folding her arms across her chest. Meanwhile, on the 17th floor, the elevator doors opened and a girl and a very tall guy came out. The guy asked why they didn't go to the 18th floor. It was Li Shi, who was looking around with confusion. When Zhou, who came out with him, put her hand on her hip and replied that Qin Yu was already there. She ironically asked Li Shi if he wanted to feel his cold gaze so soon. When Zhou quickly added that she didn't think so. When Zhou said that that guy had become famous in Huaqing for his aloofness, and his gaze would send shivers down your spine for days to come. Zhou turned her gaze to Li Shi, asking him with a smile on her face if he was afraid of him. When Zhou was a member of the Huaqing University Field Research Association, and her specialty was ghost hunter. Li Shi told her with a grin that it was not like that. He said that as a third-year student, he wanted to see what the first person from Class A in the second year could do. Li Shi was also a member of the Huaqing University Field Research Association. His nickname was Tyrannosaurus. As they approached the other members of the university, Zhou told him that in that case, if he could fight him to a draw, it would be good. After all, he was not their only opponent, there were two more from the Winter Hunter Association, as well as others who were also eager for it. She walked slightly ahead of Li Shi, spreading her arms out to the sides. Li Shi frowned, chuckling with displeasure. He said that Qin Yu thought that he was the only one who knew that the purple gold monster was here. Li Shi said that in the past 2 days, the news had spread to all the Huaqing groups, so this time the Golden Scroll hunting competition had already changed its flavor. Zhou replied that after all, it was the purple gold monster with a nobler bloodline than the gold one. She said that they had not met this monster in the Great Xia for many years. They walked to the edge of the arena floor, looking down at what was happening below. Li Shi folded his arms as when Zhou continued to say that the president said that it was a bad sign, that they should be careful. Li Shi told her not to exaggerate, asking her, after a long lull, will the wind really blow again? He laughed as below, in the arena itself, a battle was taking place between Uncle Ji and a huge lion monster. In Uncle Ji's hands, there was only a single sword. He was breathing heavily, clutching the weapon in his hands, thinking that he would definitely save Old Man Yang, so he definitely had to hold on. Uncle Ji wiped the sweat off his face, frowning at his monster opponent. The protagonist was also in this coliseum at the time, so he also saw what was happening in the arena. He thought in surprise, could it be that Uncle Ji was there? His face showed horror and surprise. Changfeng asked himself in his mind, didn't they leave? He didn't understand, why were they here? Lu Gu approached the protagonist and asked him if he knew him. Lin Changfeng was distracted for a moment, turning his gaze to Lu Gu, and then returned his eyes to the arena again, watching the battle. The protagonist said that he was just curious, what kind of person would fight in the arena, wasting his life, knowingly knowing that he would lose. Lu Gu also looked at the arena, where he was currently dodging the blows of a huge lion. Lu Gu leaned forward slightly, holding chips in his hands, which he gradually ate. Lu Gu mockingly said that fighting was too noble and beautiful a word. After all, the man in the arena in front of them was forced to enter into a slave contract with someone unknown, and began to make money. Lu Gu said that he was not worthy of fighting. Lu Gu then turned away from eating chips, turning his gaze to the protagonist, his eyebrows knitted together. He asked him to stop suspiciously, saying that this was not a question that Yadazub would ask. Lu Gu pointed his finger at Changfeng, holding a bag of chips in his other hand. He said that Yadazub had done this many times before, hadn't he? The protagonist closed his eyes, turning on his acting again. He said that this was why he was wondering what it would be like if he sent him there. Lu Gu was silent for a few seconds, telling the protagonist that they should just chat for a while about what they would do next. Changfeng chuckled with interest, saying that Lu Gu had better have valuable information, since he didn't like to waste time. Suddenly, a teleportation portal appeared between the two, an aconite flower head emerged from it. The two guys turned to look at her in surprise when she said that she found out something. When Aconite completely exited the portal, she stood between them, telling them that many new people from the Huaqing had appeared there, so when they acted, they needed to be more vigilant. Lu Gu said with a smile on his face that it was wonderful, after all, although the official hunt had not yet begun, but it was also great to taste the delicacy beforehand. He turned to his fire, saying that it would also receive something delicious. The protagonist looked at Aconite, asking her while cursing, what were they up to? Aconite turned to Lu Gu, asking him, didn't he tell him? Lu Gu explained to her with a calm expression that he was just about to say that they were going to rob. Changfeng immediately tensed up upon hearing this news. After a while, the auction began in the arena of this coliseum. The host stood in the middle of the arena with her arms outstretched, and turning to the guests on the 18th floor, said that next, it was time for the final auction. All the spectators in the stands held their breath. The host raised his index finger, that the last lot of this auction was a very specific item. He said with a smile on his face that he could confidently say that after seeing this thing, regardless of whether they got it or not, they would still understand that the visit was worth it. The stands immediately howled in indignation. Someone loudly cursed, shouting, how can one get pleasure from just one look at some treasure? He was immediately supported by other indignant spectators who agreed with him, shouting that they had already seen many treasures. They were indignant. Did the host consider them simpletons? The main character sat among them in silence. He bowed his head forward, only quietly watching what was happening in the arena. The host was also reflected in all the screens throughout the Colosseum. He shrugged his shoulders, smilingly saying that the dear guest saw many ordinary treasures. Qin Yu was watching everything that was happening in one of the special rooms for guests. He sat on a small sofa, looking at the monitor screen. The host smiled widely, asked, have they met a treasure with a human face in that case? Qin Yu was from Huaqing University, belonged to the Winter Hunters Association. His face was serious as he watched what was happening, and behind him stood his brother Qin Shan and Keqing, who were also watching this. The hosts in the arena shouted for everyone to welcome today's hero. He walked away from the center of the arena, pointing with his hand to the opening floor, from where a cage with a monster slowly appeared. The silhouette of the monster soon became visible to everyone. The main hero looked at it in surprise, and literally the next moment, the stands exploded with admiration, shouting that it was an arachnid. It was a monster with a human body that was connected to a spider's body. Everyone present cursed in surprise, asking each other, what kind of creature is this? And they did not understand, is it a man or a monster? Someone even suggested, perhaps, that it was a Spider-Man? The one who was the most indignant in the stands immediately shouted that he was a fool. Everyone's eyes widened and their mouths dropped open in astonishment. Su Keqing, who was watching this, looked at the arachnid on the screen and then asked, was there any recent preparation to rob this purple gold monster? She said that she had been wondering all this time what kind of amazing treasure it was. Keqing admitted that she hadn't expected it. Shan explained to her that it was an extremely rare Spider-Man, and an ordinary person would never know about it. Only the best libraries had some records of it. He smiled, also looking at the screen. Keqing retorted that monsters and humans were like water and fire. She stretched out her hand asking would it help them? Shan furrowed his brows, smiling with malice. He mockingly asked Su Keqing, who told her that an arachnid would help them. He also said that they were just using her. Keqing looked at him with confusion, asking, could it really be that they were using her? Qin Shan told her that it was so, after all, she was an unusual monster. He was about to say something about her having some kind of special feature, when suddenly one of the subordinates, who had been calmly pulling himself up in the background all this time, flew straight into the wall, hitting it painfully. Shan looked at this in surprise and then turned his gaze to his brother Qin Yu, silently and puzzledly looking at him. Understanding the message that Qin Yu gave him, Shan closed his eyes, telling Su Keqing not to worry about it. Keqing silently looked at him, but did not ask anything. At this time, the bidding in the arena continued and was only gaining momentum. The host pointed his hand at the arachnid, placing his other hand on its thigh. With a smile on his face, he shouted that the starting bid was 2 million. He clarified that it seemed that many were unsure due to concerns about the danger of the monster, but the host immediately assured them that it was unnecessary. He said that the monster had passed the auction hall's test, and although she was level 30, however, she was completely devoid of combat skills, being now only a peaceful talisman. The host told everyone that she was a great decoration for the house, so her specific appearance was worth every penny spent. He shouted that today they were lucky to stumble upon an absolute rarity. The host said that they would not have a chance to see it again. Arachnid, meanwhile, lowered her head down, dejectedly looking at the floor, pressing her hands to her chest. The man from the stands, as soon as he heard this, the same bid of 3 million. He frowned and furiously said that he did not care whether she was beautiful or not. After all, he could not live with this monster under the same sky, so he was going to buy her out to eradicate evil. He clenched his hand into a fist, and the people around him could only look at this display of valor and amazement. Following this man, another auctioneer began to bid. He said he was willing to give 4 million. The man screamed that monsters had been oppressing their kind for centuries, destroying families. This man said he would buy her, tie up all her spider legs at home, and then make her spit silk day and night, working for him to pay off her debts. He held his hand out in front of him, making the number 4 with his fingers, while other spectators watched with equally shocked faces. One of the other visitors to the attraction looked at the arachnid, a twisted smile spreading across his face. This guy laughed quietly, imagining something in his head, when suddenly his eyes opened wide and he screamed loudly. Saliva flowed from his mouth, and some strange spell in the form of flowers began to bind his heart. He grabbed his chest with his hands, leaning forward. Another guy sitting next to him laughingly told him to finish his speech and then let his comrade speak too. However, he was no longer in the mood for jokes. Magic sprouts began to break through right from his body, which literally a few moments later grew several meters up. The spectator and the auction immediately began to shout that they were monsters. They cursed loudly, tried to run away from there, seeing this horror, because now in the guy's place there was only his meager shell of skin and bones, and all his life force was sucked out by the very same sprout that grew out of him. A few more moments passed, and everyone who surrounded him also began to sprout strange flowers, remaining in their places, deprived of strength. The stands immediately began to gradually empty, and screams of horror were heard everywhere. The host brought the radio to his mouth and said that an incident had occurred on the 18th floor. But he immediately noticed something else interesting. He was attracted by a loud sound from the side of the cage where the monster was kept, and he saw how this very cage gradually began to rise into the air with the help of 4 engines. And on top of this cage, as if nothing had happened, sat Lu Gu. The host was taken aback, shouted loudly, asking what was going on. Lu Gu looked down at him, mockingly asking him to tell him where the people from Huaqing University were now. The host fearfully answered that they were in several VIP boxes on the first floor. Lu Gu looked back at the Colosseum, asking if there were really that many rooms there. Then he said with a smile that since nothing could be done, then he would strike 1 blow at each. A weapon suddenly appeared in his hands, which he put on his shoulder, shouting for his fire to begin charging there. His power actually went into this device, and then shot out with great power in the form of a beam. This power began to concentrate, distributing itself to the places where the VIP boxes of the Colosseum were located. In an instant, the walls of the Colosseum were damaged in many places. Lu Gu joyfully shouted for his fire to devour everything in its path. Lu Gu stood on the arachnid cage, kneeling on one knee, laughing loudly at the top of his lungs as he watched his work. At this time, Qin Yu was sitting in one of the boxes, who was protected by his energy dome from Lu Gu's attacks, so he did not move at all and was not afraid of this attack. His face remained as serious as ever. All the people inside the room were also protected by this. After coming to his senses, Qin Shan shouted, "What's going on?" Su Keqing replied that it seemed like there was an attack. The entire room around them was heavily damaged, so even the walls there were heavily breached. Qin Yu turned his gaze to the side, asking why he didn't die. He looked at Li Shi, who was bending over, looking at Qin Yu. He used his gigantism skill, telling Qin Yu that he was being very rude. Knowing that they were in the neighborhood, he didn't even help his seniors. When Zhou folded her arms across her chest, closing her eyes in resentment. Looking around the room, Li Shi asked Qin Yu, where were the rest of the people from the Winter Hunting Association? Zhou asked him, should they ask? She said that he knew about the information leak and had calculated the territory in advance. In addition, she added, the name of his hunting association could persuade most of the Huaqing students to retreat. In the ruined areas of the Colosseum, there were Huaqing students standing. But when Zhou also said that it was impossible to stop the hunters who were thirsty for blood, many people who had been occupying the stands until now began to gradually descend, flocking to the arena. Lu Gu stood on the cage, spreading his arms out to the sides, looking down at these people. He shouted that it was good, really good. Lu Gu said with a sneer, the flames that flowed in his blood could not wait to eat them, the elite of the Huaqing. His face was filled with cunning and anticipation. Unlike these hunters who clearly had no intention of giving up, the ordinary people who were also sitting on these stands hurriedly began to carry their feet from there. Everyone knew that something unimaginable was about to happen there. The surroundings were in chaos. Everyone was hurriedly leaving their seats. Only the protagonist slowly walked in this unbridled crowd with a calm step. Lin Changfeng thought that it seemed like it was the right time to give them the slip. There was no better way to hide than to take advantage of all the general panic and hide in the crowd. His gaze was serious, looking somewhere ahead, recalling that they told him that there would be many people from the Huaqing, so the protagonist also did not rule out that there was a chance that his sister, Lin Qi, could be among these people. In the end, Lin Changfeng came to the conclusion that the best solution would be to send a spirit there to scout for now, and he himself would leave from there to the maximum distance from where he could maintain contact with it. Suddenly, someone called his name, despite the fact that he was in disguise. The protagonist became wary, turning around in surprise and turning his gaze to this person. He was silent for a few seconds, examining the one who called him, and then asked in confusion, did he really recognize him? As it turned out, it was Uncle Ji. He looked terribly tired, and there were bandages all over his body that were wrapping his wounds. Uncle Ji said with a tired look that Lin Changfeng should not misunderstand him, because he did not want to do anything bad to him. He held on to one of his wounds, saying that the dead people just appeared around again, so he guessed. I asked if he was afraid that Yadazub had simply staged his death, and after he left, killed the protagonist? Uncle Ji smiled painfully, closing his eyes. He said that it was impossible, because he believed Changfeng. His cheeks were sunken, and a scraggly stubble appeared on his face. Uncle Ji said that even if he did not die, he would eventually die again. After listening to him, the protagonist asked Uncle Ji why he called out to him. Uncle Ji handed him the letter with his tired hand. The surrounding people were still bustling about. Everyone was running in different directions. Screams could be heard. No one wanted to stay there for a second longer, except for these two, around whom time seemed to have stopped. After handing over the letter, Uncle Ji addressed the protagonist by name, asking him to send this letter to his family. He also assured the protagonist that he should not worry, because it would not be in vain. Uncle Ji said that he simply had nothing to give him now. He added that his family would thank him when they saw this letter, so he was counting on it. Changfeng extended his hand forward, taking the letter from Uncle Ji's hands. The protagonist asked him why he didn't go back himself. He asked him, was it because of that slave contract? The panic around them didn't stop. The crowd continued to run away from the Colosseum. However, Lin Changfeng still said in the same calm voice that although he didn't know what happened after Uncle Ji left, there was chaos around now, so this was a good chance to escape. His words were serious. However, Uncle Ji passed by him, only telling him that he still had some business left. He said that there was no way for him to go back, because there was no way back. Changfeng looked at the back of Uncle Ji, who was leaving with the crowd, silently watching him leave. People were still running around panicking, but the sun was only shining on one person's path. At this time, the battle was still going on in the arena. Lu Gu was having fun as much as he could with those who tried to attack him while he stood at the top. Another of his opponents fell to his knees, unable to withstand the many attacks that rained down from Lu Gu. He sat languidly on the cage, shouting that he was so bored. Lu Gu thought that all of his opponents were extremely boring. The area that was under the cage was filled with people who were trying in vain to deal with the kidnappers. All of them were defeated and burned by Lu Gu's flames. Meanwhile, a whole forest of those who did not have time to leave their places, so they were absorbed by the power of aconite, blossomed in the stands. Suddenly, someone caught Lu Gu's attention by clapping his hands. He said that it was good, even very good. The man said that several guys dared to fight a humanoid monster. Lu Gu turned his gaze to the new opponent. The man was standing in one of the holes that Lu Gu made while having fun in the arena. The man told him to let go of the arachnid and get out of there. He placed his hands on his hips, clearly confident in himself. Lu Gu turned to face him, looking at the man through the forest of aconite trees. The man said with a smile on his face that his opponent was not him, but the Huaqing University. Lu Gu asked him furiously, how dare he think that he was not as good as the people of Huaqing? He furiously. However, he also said that he couldn't let his hands go. After all, this man didn't take him seriously. That means he couldn't do it, otherwise it would seem cheap. The man folded his arms in front of his chest, looking at this in surprise, while Lu Gu continued to babble that aconite had made a suitable proposal. The man smiled with fury, saying that it seemed that Lu Gu was the type that wouldn't let up until the very end. He kicked off his legs from where he was standing, flying across the entire Colosseum arena like a meteorite, and then with one sharp movement, he sent Lu Gu flying, hitting him in the lower jaw. Lu Gu slammed into one of the walls of the Colosseum. This blow was so strong that it was even able to partially destroy it, and the sound was so loud that it seemed that there would be no trace left of it. Qin Shan and Su Keqing looked on in surprise, and upon seeing Lu Gu fly, Su Keqing shouted that he seemed strong, but could he have been knocked out with one blow? They never expected such a turn of events. Qin Shan was so surprised that he even opened his mouth. But Su Keqing immediately told him to take a closer look at this man. She furrowed her brows, saying that he was level 23. The man smiled, looking in the direction he had sent Lu Gu, proudly placing his hands on his hips. He was a level 23 explosive boxer, so he was not that easy to defeat. He sneered mockingly, saying that Huaqing was at most level 20, so with a difference of 3 levels, even if they teamed up, there would still be no match for him. He looked at the place where Zhou and Li Shi stood, and there sat Qin Yu. The male boxer added that what's more, he was a level 23 martial artist, so he didn't think that any of them could withstand even one punch from him. Zhou laughed, covering her mouth with her hand, starting to laugh louder. Li Shi turned his gaze to Zhou, looking at her calmly. The man was surprised to notice her laughter and asked her what she was laughing at. Zhou smiled and ironically called him uncle, asking him what kind of place he thought Huaqing University was. She folded her arms across her chest again, asking him if he thought that this place accepted every loser? The man became tense when he heard this, so he immediately retreated, putting his hand forward. He said that he didn't want to make a mountain out of a molehill, so they should give him 5 million to retreat. After all, that's how much this monster was worth. The man said that as soon as they gave him the money, he would immediately give her to them. He asked them if they were satisfied with this deal. When Zhou patted Li Shi on the shoulder with a smile, calling him Louis the Big Guy, telling him that since this man could still hold on, he should go and deal with him. After all, the reputation of the Huaqing students was still important. Li Shi said, offended, that he had already asked her not to play with homophones. After all, his surname was Li, not Louis. After all, his surname meant plum, not a mangled plant. Li Shi pointed his finger at the man, saying that it seemed like he had not gone to university, otherwise he would know that levels were definitely important. However, to become truly strong, the main task was to master each level. When Zhou turned her head in the other direction, no longer paying attention to this, while Li Shi talked to the boxer man. Li Shi told him that it was like a lake and a pond, because although the lake had more water, but the water outlet of the pond was larger, and in this case, the explosive power of this pond would become more powerful in a short period of time. The protagonist was watching all this from the corner with his corpses, thinking that this was a very loud statement. He asked the man, did he really think that the second-year S-class student, the best genius and the best in resources, was only at level 20 now? Li Shi was talking about Qin Yu, who continued to drink his tea without much interest, not paying attention to what was happening around him. Li Shi began to accumulate all his powerful strength, shining because of it so much as if his body was covered in lightning, and then he chuckled, saying that he had already broken through the measly difference of 3 levels last year. In an instant, he was right in front of the man, raising his huge fist above his head. The male boxer backed away, seeing the threat approaching him. However, it was too late. Li Shi, who was right next to him, with one sharp movement hit the man so hard that he flew into the cage on which he was standing, and then hit the floor of the arena, destroying it into many pieces. All this was accompanied by such a loud roar that it could be compared to an explosion. The man covered his face with his hands, which were significantly damaged after such a powerful attack. The man's eyes turned very red, and he cursed loudly, saying that they were all overconfident children. The man shouted that he grew up on the blood of a monster. He turned his gaze to his hand and was surprised to notice that his veins on his hands swelled and acquired a strange glowing blue hue. He asked himself in confusion, "What is this?" But before he could say this, Li Shi wanted to attack him again, now directing both of his hands at the man with a smile on his face. However, while he was flying towards him, he noticed strange processes that were happening to his opponent. The man began to cough, and his body began to be covered with strange blisters and increasingly expanding vessels and veins, which also continued to glow more and more. Feeling something terrible inside himself, burning and bursting, the man screamed loudly, squeezing and hugging himself with his hands in pain. Li Shi covered his face with his hands, screaming that this was bad. He felt the shockwave, and within seconds the man exploded with enormous power, and the explosion was so strong that it completely destroyed the arena and the adjacent walls of the Colosseum. Wen Zhou worriedly called Li Shi by name, looking at what was happening below in horror. At this time, outside the Colosseum, a battle was about to begin. In one of the cities, someone laughed loudly, calling Ji stupid. This guy said that he tricked him by saying that if he signed a slave contract, he would not touch the others, so he believed him. This man continued to laugh, saying that they really were hunters. On the gate of this place, a drawing of a skull and fists was visible. In the courtyard of this place, 2 men were standing near one of the metal barrels, roasting meat on it. The second man said that he thought the guy opposite him had gone crazy, but it turns out that he has been eating quite well lately. He was gobbling up the meat his companion had cooked while the other man continued to cook more with a smug face. He told him that it was a pity that with all his tricks he couldn't figure out where the crystals came from. He said that there was a fortune behind them. The second man replied that now he understood why he hadn't come to him for a deal, because regardless of whether the treasury contained gold scrolls in addition to gold ore, since he was using his ability, he wouldn't take less than he deserved. The man who was frying the meat answered him with a smile that he didn't have to worry, because he knew the rules. Then the second man mentioned that he had sold one of them to the arena and asked, wouldn't that be a problem, because he didn't want to get into trouble. The man told him that there couldn't be a problem, because how long could he survive in fights to the death? He said that she should be happy that he became a slave, otherwise he would be the same as the others. Before he could finish laughing, the gate to that place was suddenly broken. Both men turned towards the sound, looking at the person who had come to them in horror. It was Uncle Ji. He was standing at the gate, smiling fiercely, radiating danger. The man who had been roasting meat asked in surprise, could it really be him? He put his hand on his thigh, still looking with disdain at Boria, who continued to calmly stand at the door. The man next to him asked him who it was. He mockingly asked if he was thirsty together. The man said that it seemed like he was unlucky. The man roasting meat with a calm smile told him that he was actually lucky, because it was the same guy he had sold to the arena. The man said that his interlocutor's abilities would be needed by him right now. His interlocutor calmly bit off a piece of meat from what was in his hands, looking at the man, who had many throwing daggers in his hands. His companion asked if he could handle it himself. The man replied that given his terrible condition, it would be very easy to defeat him. He took a fighting stance, and then threw all the knives in his hands at once towards Uncle Ji. These knives, accelerated by his internal force, quickly headed straight towards Uncle Ji, immediately hitting his tired body. These knives penetrated deeply, restraining Uncle Ji. The ends of these knives were tied with energy threads filled with mana, with which the man was able to hold his opponent in place. The man shouted that Uncle Ji's entire body was suppressed by him, so now it was his companion's turn to act. The man walked along the threads, slowly heading towards Uncle Ji. He laughed as he got closer and closer, and then extended his hand to the side, directing it towards the immobilized Uncle Ji. He turned to Uncle Ji with a mocking smile, calling him a buddy, telling him that his ability was to read the mind, so it could turn him into a moron. He asked ironically if he minded it. An evil smile shone on his face, and this guy, with his brows furrowed, looked down at Uncle Ji, preparing to use this attack on him. Magic energy shone in his hand, and he brought his hand closer to Uncle Ji's head, and then completely placed it on his head, shouting that in that case, he would take a look. Uncle Ji opened his eyes and mouth, and purple energy seemed to pour out from there. He immediately plunged into his old memories, reliving and reliving the horror he had experienced. He again remembered how he was kneeling, desperately screaming that he could not believe it. Around him lay his half-dead comrades. Their bodies were badly beaten and seriously damaged. Only Uncle G survived that time, and his men, to his own horror, died. Then he remembered why this had happened in the first place. The moment when he and his team were surrounded by strange people was still fresh in his memories. They were caught between these people and an abyss. Uncle G cautiously asked them who they were. But the people kept advancing, getting closer and closer. One of them only mockingly asked in response, "Who else could you meet by chance in the wild?" Then Uncle G remembered another moment that preceded this. They had just escaped from the abyss where they fought the lizard, and Uncle G was telling his team that if they took the gold ore and sold it, their trip would be worth it. This day should not have turned out to be terrible. They were discussing their future actions together as usual, but everything went topsy-turvy. The last memory that came to Uncle G's mind was him holding the gold pills in his hands, and then saying that there was no way back for them. Currently, the man who had penetrated his memories snorted in surprise, returning to reality before he had found what he needed there. The second man asked him in surprise what happened. He wondered if he had found the source of the gold ore. He was still holding the sea in his hands with his knives and magic threads so that he could not move. The second man told him that it was not so. After all, he had almost found it, but the projection had turned off. The man shouted that he had seen 3 pills, so it seemed like Uncle G had accepted it. But before he could say that, Uncle G, who was being held by his hand, quickly broke free from the grip of those magic knives and with one sharp movement, broke free from the influence of the powers of this guy who could look into memories. He quickly appeared behind him, and then with one sharp movement, he hit the back of his head, this man on the ground face down. He could no longer move and help the second man. Everything around Uncle G was burning with a red aura, as if he was engulfed in fire, and his eyes were so lifeless that he looked more like a zombie. The man staggered back, shouting, "What was that maroon aura?" He looked at Uncle G in fear, and wanted to ask something, but before he could, because Uncle G in an instant was right in front of his face, which scared him even more. Grabbing the man by the throat, Uncle G lifted him up, squeezing his throat, causing the man to cough, trying to free himself from this grip. Uncle G menacingly asked him, "Where is his team?" His gaze was full of fury and did not tolerate refusal. The man coughed again, mentioning the maroon aura. He asked Uncle G, did he take the illegal drugs that the arena gives to slaves before the death match? When Uncle G heard this, he pressed the man's face against the hot grill where he had been roasting meat with one sharp movement. The man's eyes began to water when he felt the hot temperature, and the capillaries in his eyes burst. Uncle G furiously asked him again, "Where is his team?" He was about to tear the man apart without waiting for an answer. Finally, he began to answer. When the heat became so unbearable, the man answered that they were all in the forbidden arena. But Uncle G was not going to let him go. He broke through the barrel with a powerful blow, driving the man into the ground. Now he had another goal. He turned his gaze to the side, starting to think about the forbidden arena. At this time, something was also happening in the forbidden Tiantai arena. 5 people stood at the edges of a pentagram, which was surrounded by a magical field that was also glowing. One of them turned to their boss, asking him if they could take a break. The guy said that they had been preparing for this crazy awakening ritual for half a day, and had not received any orders. The man told him to stop talking nonsense, because without an order from His Excellency, they could not deviate from the ritual even half a step. The guy countered him, saying that they were the 6 brave Shishan, who were still famous among hunters. He asked him, placing his hand on his hip, who in the end was the person who made him so afraid. The man told him that they did not know him, and did not know how terrible he was. At this time, one of the corpses in the arena, which had sprouted due to the powers of aconite, began to revive. The boss of those guys explained to them that they were killing to get treasure. However, this man was born to kill. The corpse slowly raised its head, staring lifelessly at the arena. At this time, after the explosion that had taken the male boxer, the smoke gradually began to clear. When Zhou worriedly continued to call Li Shi's name from the edge of the stands. Then, she was surprised to hear him reply that he was fine. Li Shi said that fortunately, he had reacted quickly and used the dome to block the fire. He was sitting on the ground, covered by the dome, which was also burning with Lu Gu's fire. The male boxer he had been fighting was burning outside of this dome, deprived of life. When Zhou shouted that she would help him, She sent the best of her power towards Li Shi, hitting the dome he was in. Li Shi immediately desperately shouted for her not to do that. He told her to stop. After all, this thing absorbs energy, so it could easily disable her abilities. When Zhou asked in surprise, "What does this mean?" she also stopped releasing that stream of energy, irritated with her tongue. When Zhou clenched her hand into a fist, looking down from the podium at the trees and blue fire that surrounded everything, Qin Shan asked in surprise, "What kind of ability was this?" He said that it was very strange. Su Keqing, who was standing next to him, was also shocked. She said that the fire was like a living thing, so it was creepy. The two looked at what was happening, puzzled. Qin Yu, who came up to Zhou from behind, told her that Li Shi's endurance was enough to last for another 10 minutes at most. He folded his hands behind his back, watching what was happening there without much interest. When Zhou turned around at him in surprise, asking what he meant, she didn't understand. Could there be something wrong with him? Qin Yu brought her to explain that the source of any ability is a person, so due to a person's decision, any ability can lose its support. Li Shi at this time was sitting inside the dome, trying to maintain it, so as not to be left without protection in the fire. Zhou desperately shouted that they didn't know who started the fire. However, Qin Yu wasn't interested in Li Shi's fate. He moved his gaze to the arachnid that was scurrying around in the cage, trying to avoid the fire, and then said that the spider girl belonged to him. When Zhou shouted that it was a deal. However, she said that they would limit themselves to just the girl. After all, they would never give up the purple gold monster. Qin Yu emotionlessly said that he didn't care. He put his hands forward, and a small spark of magical energy appeared between them. He folded his hands together, creating a round protective dome around him, which began to grow larger and larger, filling the entire area. Lu Gu, who had been hanging on one of the broken reinforcement bars of the Colosseum above the arena, looked at what was happening in surprise. Even the reanimated corpse was surprised by this turn of events, and the protagonist, who was also watching this, was also surprised. Only Aconite didn't care. She lay silently on her tree, watching the scene. A smile touched Qin Yu's lips. He said that since they were already there, they should all come out. The corpse rose to his feet, saying that it was interesting. Aconite turned around in surprise, asking him when he came. She asked him if he knew Xiao. The protagonist wondered in surprise, what kind of ability was this? He felt like he was being seen through for a moment. Zhou asked in a threateningly calm voice, "Were there 4 of them?" And then, using her power as if it were a bow, she pulled the bowstring of it, directing the flow of her powerful energy in the direction she needed. She shouted that in that case, she would destroy them all. When Zhou released the bowstring, sending the energy towards those who were present in the arena, besides the people she knew. This powerful energy immediately sawed the reanimated corpse in half, knocking it down. Then one of the beams headed towards Aconite. However, she quickly managed to dodge, so this terrifying energy rushed past, but the main character was much less lucky. The flow of energy hit his controlled one directly, hitting it with a powerful blow. The energy also headed towards Lu Gu, but he quickly dodged, letting go of his hands from the grate on which he was hanging until that moment. Lu Gu flew down with loud screams, falling rapidly. However, he used his skill without problems, loudly shouting, "Bone fire!" Lu Gu landed on a platform that he made from his own fire, taking a stable position. Then he chuckled, asking, "Is that all?" But as soon as he turned to the side, he immediately screamed in horror, noticing the streams of energy rushing towards him, which he, it would seem, dodged. He had to bring the sprinting, using his bone fire skill as if it was a skateboard, shouting, "Could it be homing?" Indeed, streams of energy followed him wherever he went, chasing Lu Gu throughout the entire Colosseum. Meanwhile, outside the Colosseum, Changfeng finally came to his senses, regaining consciousness from his controlled corpse. Currently, he was at a safe distance from this battle, so he could allow himself to ponder, asking himself, could these really be the Huaqing students? He thought that shot was really powerful. The protagonist thought that he was probably only wrong about one thing. After all, his level was too low right now, so even if he found out about his sister, he would be powerless to fix it. Lin Changfeng came to the conclusion that his first priority was to become stronger as soon as possible. He stood on the roof of one of the buildings, looking at the Colosseum where the battle was currently ongoing. Then, something from below caught his gaze. He wondered in surprise, was Uncle G really there? Indeed, Uncle G was walking down the street, illuminated by blood-red energy. All the passers-by who passed by him tried to walk as far as possible, avoiding him. The protagonist jumped off the roof of the house, calling out to Uncle G. He tried to get his attention, but Uncle G continued to walk forward. Changfeng tried to call out to him again, asking him, why did he come back? He wanted to ask him about the changes in his body, so he put his hand on Uncle G's shoulder. However, he only pushed him away using the energy currents that surrounded him. Because of this powerful energy, the protagonist also flew far back, loudly clearing his throat from such an unexpected attack. He wondered in surprise, what did this mean? Changfeng landed on his feet, taking a stable stance. He frowned, gritting his teeth, trying to figure out what was happening. When Uncle G turned around, a terrible anger was reflected on his face. The protagonist immediately paid attention to his gaze, thinking that it was a very strange power. Changfeng immediately wondered what happened in such a short time. The stone in the protagonist's inventory reacted to these strange energy flows, so Changfeng immediately wondered if this meant that there was energy that he could absorb. He asked himself, could this be an energy leak? The protagonist looked at Uncle G's retreating back, thinking that this was not the case. After all, according to his past experience, the more abundant the energy absorbed, the darker the stone was. Lin Changfeng thought that there was basically no difference between this power and the bone fire. However, the stone's reaction was more calm. He frowned again, thinking that it seemed like he had to take a risk. Lin Changfeng clenched his fist, continuing to watch Uncle G. At this time, Lu Gu tearfully continued to flee from those attacking energy arrows. He cried out pitifully, calling Aconite by name. Lu Gu whined, screaming that if she didn't save him from that wicked woman, he wouldn't be able to bear it any longer. Lu Gu was really sweating profusely while running away from that attack. After all, he had been flying above the Colosseum all this time, and Aconite had only been silently watching this show. Then she noticed something strange. She thought that aura was familiar to her, and then she realized that the magic field had activated. Aconite addressed Zhou, calling her an archer. Zhou turned her gaze to her in surprise, and Aconite told her that she hoped that when Zhou would show her all her power the next time they met. Zhou irritatedly called Aconite an impudent woman. She said that no one had ever escaped from a hunter. However, after using her teleportation channel, she quickly began to dissolve into thin air and then completely disappeared, so when Zhou's arrow flew past the place where she was a second ago, but was no longer able to do anything. Zhou screamed in surprise, what does this mean? And Nam watched in confusion as her opponent disappeared from sight. Then Aconite began to appear somewhere high up on the upper floors of the Colosseum, where Lu Gu was flying past. Lu Gu looked at the portal appearing in surprise, and then Aconite crawled out of it, saying that it was time for them to go. Lu Gu called her name with despair and joy in his voice, saying that she had finally appeared. He extended his hand forward to meet Aconite's outstretched hand, and then they grabbed each other's hands tightly, and Aconite pulled him into the portal while when Zhou's arrow flew past them. Qin Shan asked in surprise, did they really disappear? Su Keqing furrowed her brows, asking with interest, could it be that she was an extremely rare spatial professional? Just a few seconds and they were no longer there. Once they were out of the battlefield and landed on a solid surface, Lu Gu immediately started yelling at Aconite, asking her why she had pulled him out. He told her that they had agreed to show her that she was worthy to the Huaqing people, so now he felt embarrassed that he had escaped. Aconite turned to face him, asking him if he was the one who had begged for help. Lu Gu sheepishly told her that she knew that he was not strong in resisting long-range attacks. He scratched his cheek with his finger, asking her if she couldn't transfer those arrows to another space. He said that if that were the case, there would be no need for him to run away. However, since they had escaped, it would have been worthwhile to take that spider with them. He asked Aconite if she hadn't been their target. Aconite confidently told him that the situation had changed and pointed her finger somewhere to the side. Right where the pentagram had been just a moment ago, there were now raging, terrifying demonic hands that had captured everyone who had participated in the summoning ritual. The men screamed in fear, asking their boss, what was this? The demonic hands soon crushed everyone who had participated in this ritual. Lu Gu was puzzled and asked Aconite, what were they doing? Aconite told him, this was the ritual to awaken the arachnid. Lu Gu asked her again, what does awakening the arachnid mean? At this time, the Huaqing students had approached the monster's cage. Aconite explained to Lu Gu that awakening would allow the level 30 arachnid to show its true colors. Indeed, this monster now looked more furious than before when it participated in the auction. This beam of demonic energy that those people had awakened headed straight towards the arachnid, accompanied by loud screams from the people who had been crushed by the summoning ritual. Aconite and Lu Gu watched from the roof of the Colosseum. Moments later, a huge energy beam burst out from the cage where the arachnid was. Soaring high into the air, Lu Gu screamed loudly in surprise, and Aconite shouted at him not to stand still. "They are leaving." This place had become too dangerous, so they quickly left. Aconite took Lu Gu by the hand, pulling him back into the portal. A few seconds later, the beam gained such power that it seemed to completely destroy the already battered Colosseum. Qin Yu looked at this in surprise, because he never expected something like this to happen. A better continued to rush upward, awakening the arachnid. Qin Yu covered its face with his hand, looking at this. As soon as the better reached the maximum height, a huge pentagram began to form around its end. This pentagram glowed bright red, attracting the attention of everyone who was in the area at that moment. Another corpse on the Colosseum came to life. It attracted Qin Yu's attention by loudly shouting, "Bingo!" The corpse was placed on his hand, saying that death and horror were coming. He was clearly in anticipation of what was about to happen. The energy around the pentagram began to gather more and more. Whirlwinds of wind began to spread everywhere. Trumpets shouted that they would all die. The residents began to watch in surprise what was happening above the Colosseum. One of them pointed to the pentagram, saying that something was happening in the Forbidden Arena. Everyone around wondered what it was. The residents of the city stood with their mouths open, looking at this, while inside this pentagram a web began to gradually appear. A few moments later, the energy beam brought the very same arachnid girl who was now there to this web. However, instead of immediately starting to attack, she began to create a dense dome of her own web around her body. The main character looked at this in surprise, frowning his brows. The system window next to him wrote that a skill was detected that affected the hunting zone area. The system window warned him that the area of effect was immune to skills below the monarch level. Changfeng thought that such a skill was extremely rare among monsters. He turned to the fallen angel who sent him these system windows, asking him what effect was in effect in this area. The fallen angel answered him with the system window that the effect of the hunting zone was such that the level of prey was suppressed within a radius of 1 kilometer, and the effect of bloodlust was also active, from which the combat power increased with each prey caught. The protagonist thought, what kind of level suppression is this? It was the first time he had seen such a thing. Lin Changfeng thought that the arachnid was now in a cocoon, and although the suppression was working, how was it going to hunt? Indeed, the monster hid inside a dense cocoon. However, huge spiders began to appear everywhere inside the web, which began to gradually slide down. The residents started screaming in fear, asking what was that? The spiders were descending down to the city on their webs, while the residents were screaming that they were giant spiders, and unfortunately there were a whole bunch of them. Panic began in the city. Everyone was clutching their heads, trying to figure out what to do. The worst luck was for those who were the first to be attacked by these terrible monsters. The residents started running away screaming, begging for help, but many were still killed in the process. The main character saw with horror that one of these monsters was also approaching him. He thought that the arachnid was using summoning to gain experience, just like him. According to his calculations, the spiders were about level 15. He crouched down on the ground, unbuttoning his cloak. Vera shouted loudly that he was not going to sit in a cocoon. He jumped high into the air, throwing his cloak aside, ending up right above the spider. Then, even the spider itself was surprised by the twist of fate. Where equally used the power of his resurrected dead, causing one of them to launch a spear upward, cutting the spider, leaving a huge hole in it, and then the spear flew further. The protagonist caught it with the spear, continuing to fly with it higher and higher. Poking his spear into the cocoon, he thought that he had hit the very heart. In his hands was the very stone that could absorb energy. Lin Changfeng held onto the spear with his hand, pushing against it with his feet. He shouted loudly, "Absorption!" The protagonist pressed this stone to the arachnid, and the fallen angel notified the protagonist through the system window that he had gained enough experience, so now his level had been raised to 13. The protagonist thought with a smile that the arachnid was not resisting him. Meanwhile, the arachnid inside the cocoon hugged her body with her hands. But there was also a strange mark on the back of her neck that began to glow, and then strange dark worms began to emerge from there. The protagonist looked in surprise as a strange, terrifying energy began to envelop the cocoon. It literally began to sparkle. The protagonist put away his stone, shouting, "This was bad!" A magic circle began to form around the cocoon, and the blast wave around it sent Changfeng flying backwards. Meanwhile, on the streets of Yimian City, Lu Gu walked down the road with Aconite, asking her in surprise, "Did Xiao really plan this all out long ago?" He asked her in a hurt voice, "Why didn't he tell him anything?" And then asked her why didn't she tell him anything. Aconite asked him to shut up. She only briefly told him that it was necessary. Aconite began to explain to him that the more you were an object, the harder it was to obtain it, but the easier it was to make a person believe. Lu Gu asked her in surprise, "Believe what?" Aconite was irritated, so she didn't want to continue the argument. She turned around, asking Lu Gu if she told him let's pretend that they came for the spider, would he still act as casually as before? Lu Gu couldn't say anything against her. After all, she was right. A few moments later, they opened the door to a room, walking inside. On the table in front of them was a skull and a paper with something written on it. They walked inside, and Aconite told him that Xiao had left a note for them. She picked up the piece of paper, and then, after reading what was written on it, she told Lu Gu that someone had caused the curse that he had cast on the spider. However, Huaqing University had nothing to do with it, so he was going to figure it out. There were also worms crawling around the skull, scurrying around there. Aconite said that she didn't expect such geniuses to appear in this city. Lin Changfeng was lying on the broken asphalt, smashed there by a powerful blast wave. His entire body was covered in bruises from such a shocking fall. The protagonist thought that when the stone absorbed the power, he felt the resistance of the cocoon. He learned that a completely new power had appeared inside the cocoon. Changfeng raised himself up on the ground, closing one of his eyes, thinking that this power seemed to be able to control the cocoon itself. He did not yet know what was going on, but he had a chance to raise several levels at once, even if there were casualties. He wiped the blood that was near his mouth, and then directed his gaze to the Colosseum, the wall of which literally exploded. He was surprised to see Su Keqing, Qin Shan, Wen Zhou, and Li Shi flying out from there, screaming as they fell from there. The reason for this was Qin Yu, who tried to destroy the living corpse. He put his hand forward. There was still a lot of dust around. However, the skeleton just laughed as it reassembled itself, saying that this was to be expected from Qin Yu, since his level had been suppressed and reduced to 15, and his combat power had not changed at all. The skeleton said that it seemed like it really wanted to kill him. The skeleton asked Qin Yu if this was because he had awakened the spider's second form. He told Qin Yu that he had to hurry, since the spider was still weak, but would only get stronger until its level reached 30, and then when it broke out of its cocoon, it would be invincible. The skeleton coquettishly rose to its feet, telling Qin Yu that he was proposing a deal. He said that Qin Yu would get the spider, and he would kill all of Qin Yu's friends. The skeleton asked Qin Yu if he would agree to this. Qin Yu menacingly asked the skeleton if he wanted to die. He said that in that case, he would help him. Qin Yu stood in front of the skeleton, putting his hand in his pocket, emitting evil energy. The skeleton looked at Qin Yu in surprise, and then began to laugh, saying that he thought that they had something in common. The skeleton placed his hand on his skull, saying that, however, Qin Yu was willing to give up his goals for the sake of useless people. Removing his bone hand from the skull, the skeleton said that Qin Yu was very disappointing. He began to walk away in the other direction, while Qin Yu watched him go, but he did not get far, because Qin Yu, having raised his hand, used his power on him. In the blink of an eye, the skeleton's bones were completely destroyed, knocking out someone's soul from this form. Qin Yu, with a serious expression, frowning his brows, said that he prefers not to choose. Scattered on the ground, and someone's dark energy began to gather from them. When this energy materialized into a dark clot, it said, "Is there a middle ground between falling into the abyss and being in hell, death, or a life of torment?" This clot of dark energy acquired a blurry face and smiled slyly. Qin Yu was silent at first, and then with a calm face answered that it seemed that his opponent was confident in his strength. However, Qin Yu also confidently asked him if he thought that he would not recognize who he was. The clot of energy looked at Qin Yu in surprise, and he in turn began to expand the protective field around him more and more. Qin Yu said that he had control over space, so he felt an aura inside it. The protective field became larger and larger, growing to enormous sizes. This clot of energy, more like a shadow, looked at Qin Yu with puzzlement, telling him that he was slightly overdoing it. A few seconds later, Qin Yu covered the entire arena with his ability. The entire Colosseum was now under one dome, like a snow globe from a New Year's collection. The protagonists, Li Shi, Zhou, Keqing and Qin Shan watched this in shock. After all, no one expected such a turn of events. Qin Yu calmly said that this would be enough. The next moment, this ball above the Colosseum created by Qin Yu seemed to collapse, creating powerful streams of wind and dust from the destruction of the arena. The protagonist and everyone who just left the arena felt the power of Qin Yu's ability on themselves, trying to hide their faces from the strong wind. This stream was so strong that Qin Shan could not even stand it, and, falling to the ground, hit himself painfully, which surprised Changfeng and Keqing. Keqing worriedly called his name, asking if he was okay. All this time, she was in the hands of the protagonist, which made Qin Shan very angry. Qin Shan started screaming as soon as he saw Changfeng. He yelled at him to get his dirty hands off her. Qin Shan was serious, so he quickly jumped up and flew into the air, aiming his fist at the protagonist. However, he failed to land a blow, because Changfeng immediately used his summoning power, creating another undead in front of him, so Qin Shan hit the shield. Qin Shan was surprised to think that Changfeng was able to block it. The undead threw his wife back with such force that he flew back several meters again, meeting his body with the ground, screaming loudly. When he landed in surprise, he spent a few more seconds looking at Changfeng, who was standing behind his undead. Qin Shan frantically thought that this couldn't be. He didn't understand how the protagonist could become so strong in just a few days. He understood where Qin Yu's talent came from, but he didn't understand where such a country bumpkin got it from. He thought it was impossible. Keqing angrily shouted at him to stop it. She reminded them both that now was not the time to quarrel. And while she was arguing, the protagonist noticed that a spider on a web had appeared above them. This monster tried to attack the two of them with its powerful paws, but Changfeng quickly reacted and, grabbing Keqing, led her to a safe side. Changfeng shouted that they had become more aggressive. He stopped with Keqing a few meters away from the spider, saying that it looked like their mother was about to leave the cocoon. The protagonist said that Keqing had to leave, otherwise it would be too late. But Keqing flatly refused, saying that the arachnid was a purple gold monster and their target. She shouted menacingly that she would not leave from there. Keqing was serious, so she frowned, looking at the protagonist. Changfeng asked her in surprise, "Is this really a purple gold monster?" Keqing answered him that it was so, because this had not happened in their world for a long time. Throughout history, the frequency of purple gold monsters did not exceed 5%. She looked at the spider seriously, and Changfeng thought that now it was clear to him why he had not met such. Keqing said that now was not the time to explain, but she asked the protagonist to understand that she could not leave there now. While they were talking, the monsters continued to rampage in the city. These huge spiders killed local residents and destroyed buildings. On the site of the destroyed Colosseum, Qin Yu stood among the many fragments of this building. He said with a smile on his face that his opponent was the first to escape oblivion, so he will remember him. On one of the roofs that was not far from the Colosseum, there were two men. One of them, named Xiao, spoke first, saying that he said that Qin Yu was not like other professionals, so he had to be careful with him, otherwise, death was inevitable. The second man was named Bea. He sat on the roof next to him, and clicked his tongue at him, saying that he just didn't expect him to be immune to the level 30 monster hunting zone. However, he mentioned that Xiao saved his life. All this time, it was he who was controlling those corpses and skeletons that were on the Colosseum. It was his soul that was transmigrating into their bodies. Bea frowned at him and said that at the beginning, they were the same level, and Qin Yu was also suppressed, but then the suppression stopped. Bea said that he didn't think that Qin Yu would intentionally show weakness. Xiao calmly replied that Qin Yu was a spatial professional, so he thought that he had no immunity to the hunting area, so he isolated himself. Bea asked Xiao if he meant that Qin Yu had cut himself off from the general space. Xiao adjusted his glasses and replied positively, saying that he could not isolate the space at one time, and that it would be useful to them. Xiao added ironically that it seemed that Bea's recklessness had worked to their advantage. Bea remained silent for a few seconds, resting his head on his hand, and then asked Xiao why he had come. Xiao immediately replied that he originally wanted to know how the curse he had cast on the spider was doing. But Bea interrupted him by holding his hand out, telling him that he did not have to answer since he was not interested. Bea started to walk away, and Xiao, watching him, told him to stop causing trouble, because according to the plan, Qin Yu was supposed to get the spider. Bea chuckled and replied that he did not obey orders. He put his hands in his pockets, continuing to walk away. Xiao sighed heavily and said that he had no discipline. Then he turned his gaze to what was happening below and said that, however, his journey was not in vain. He said that he seemed to have found a very interesting specimen. It was Uncle Ji, who was still walking through the streets of the city, wrapped in a red terrifying energy. Xiao said that he was almost torn to pieces by such a colossal external force. It was a very unusual body. Xiao laughed, watching this. Xiao raised his hand, in which dark energy began to gather, and said that Uncle Ji will be his next parasite king. Dozens of worms burst out of his hand and flew in all directions. These worms hit all the passers-by who were walking down the street at that time, including these worms headed towards Ji. His poor body was also penetrated by one of these terrible worms. Xiao, with a menacing smile of a madman, told them all to sacrifice their fresh blood for the new king. All the people who were penetrated by these disgusting worms began to gradually flock towards Ji. Meanwhile, Moore grabbed his head with his hands, feeling how a new foreign force began to corrode him from the inside. The zombified people started running towards Ji. They were screaming and yelling as they headed towards him. Changfeng and Keqing, who saw this, turned their attention in surprise. The protagonist asked in surprise, "Is it really Ji?" Keqing turned around to look at him, asking Changfeng if he knew this person. Changfeng replied that he did, as they used to be on the same team. The crowd of people continued to advance towards Uncle Ji, who clenched his fist, becoming more and more enveloped in a dark fog. Keqing said that there seemed to be something wrong with him, as he had at least taken doping pills. Changfeng turned his gaze to her in surprise, asking about doping. Keqing explained to him that it was given to slaves who had entered into a contract with the Forbidden Arena. Uncle Ji at this time began to confront the people who were running towards him, decapitating each attacker with just one blow. Keqing said that, as a rule, such drugs give a person a mad strength that the human body is unable to bear. She explained that they are usually taken in mortal combat. Even one pill will cause serious damage to the internal organs, let alone 3. Keqing said in surprise, how did he manage to survive? The fight between Ji and these people continued. Blow after blow was dealt. Ji confidently resisted them. The protagonist was lost in his thoughts, asking himself, could this power that the stone absorbs be related to the substances used in doping? He thought that perhaps he was close to the truth. Changfeng stood up on his feet, heading towards Uncle Ji. Keqing asked him in surprise, what is he planning? And he hopes that Uncle Ji can pass it on to his family himself. Keqing worriedly stood up from the ground and blocked the protagonist's path, telling him not to go there. Changfeng looked at her in surprise and then asked, why did she say that? He furrowed his brows, and Keqing told him that he should see it for himself. Her fingers glowed and her face became serious. Changfeng asked her in surprise, what did this mean? But before he could say that, Keqing placed her fingers on his forehead, saying with a smile that this was her ability. Her ability was the Tree of Life. A mark with the Tree of Life appeared on Changfeng's hand. He asked Su Keqing in surprise, why did he suddenly feel a connection with her heart? Keqing replied that she had made a contract with him, and now all the damage he received in battle would be transferred to her through the Tree of Life. Therefore, as long as she lived, he would not die. Changfeng leaned over worriedly and asked, what would happen to her? Keqing smiled confidently, asking, is he worried about her? She pointed at her, saying that although they had exchanged lives, but she was a ghost messenger, so her Tree of Life was much stronger than other people, so it would not be easy to kill her. Changfeng then asked why she stopped him in that case. Keqing turned towards Ji. Her face became even more serious, and told him to look there again. As soon as the protagonist looked there, he saw lifeless trees sticking out from the people who fought Uncle Ji and from himself. Keqing told the protagonist that only a ghost messenger could see someone else's Tree of Life, but she passed on her ability to him. Changfeng was shocked and said that a withered tree meant that he was already dead. Suddenly, the protagonist noticed something strange. He asked Keqing to wait, asking her what was there. He told her to take a look, because there were strange worms on the trees, which seemed to control people's lives. Changfeng said that he suspected that a human was involved. Indeed, there was such a worm sitting on one of the branches. The protagonist remembered that he had seen the same worms in the cocoon. He asked himself if that boss was controlled by a human. He immediately wondered why that person was hiding, and what did he need the boss for. It seemed that when he absorbed the power of the Nier, that person discovered him. Keqing turned to Changfeng, saying that they had better not act until they figured out the situation. Changfeng silently gritted his teeth, and Keqing noticed that he looked scared, which was not like him. The protagonist told her that he felt that something terrible was about to happen. The city was engulfed in flames and destruction. And above the city, Yan and Lu Deng were hovering on a mechanical apparatus in the shape of a bird. Zhou Yan said that things were bad for them, so he was afraid that they would have to persuade Qin Yu to retreat. He squatted down on it, and Lu Deng told him that the purple gold monster was still there, so did he think they could persuade it to do it? Yen told him that it was certainly better than dying. On the other hand, he also believed that others who wanted the purple gold monster would definitely not take the risk. Yen smiled, saying that this meant that the monster would go to the Winter Hunters Association. An angry Qin Shan began to shout, asking Keqing, who was tied to her tree of life. He even threatened to kill him. Qin Shan took Keqing's hand, squeezing it in his hand, and Keqing with a dissatisfied face shouted at him to let her go. After all, it was her own decision. She said that she did not want to delay their plans for the boss anymore. Besides, she could still tie Qin Yu to the tree of life. Keqing pulled her hand away and Qin Shan fights, looking at her with a serious face. Qin Shan said anxiously that she could only bind 2 people to her heart, so he was worried about himself. His face became frightened, and then he angrily turned towards Changfeng, believing that everything was his fault. Keqing tried to bring Qin Shan back to his senses again, shouting at him to stop doing this. And Changfeng only asked indifferently, what happened again? Qin Shan turned his menacing gaze to him, then immediately shouted at him to die. Streams of his power began to gather around him, and Keqing tried to call out to him again, but it was all in vain because he was so angry. The protagonist realized that this was the power of the 16th level. He frowned, looking at the enemy in front of him, but suddenly Qin Shan appeared inside the cubic space, which surprised not only himself, but also the protagonist. Keqing was also in the same space, and she cried out in surprise, which Changfeng noticed. The two suddenly disappeared from view, as if they had completely evaporated, which surprised the protagonist no less. They appeared behind Qin Yu, who was approaching Changfeng from behind, putting his hand in his pocket as if he was not worried about anything. The protagonist turned around, starting to accumulate power in his hand to counter his opponent. However, Qin Yu, putting his hand forward, quickly enclosed him in the same space inside the cube. The power inside the space that Qin Yu used immediately began to affect the protagonist, forcing him to press himself against the ground. Changfeng thought that he could not breathe. The fallen angel immediately notified him that the effect of space suppression was obtained, so the body weight was increased by 1,000 times. Since Keqing and the protagonist were now bound by the Tree of Life, she immediately felt what Changfeng felt and fell to her knees on the ground, closing her eyes. Qin Yu immediately took notice. He saw the mark burning on her hand and asked her, did she really pass the Tree of Life to him? Qin Yu chuckled thoughtfully, closing his eyes, and then released the 3 of them he had enclosed in the space from the effects of it. Keqing immediately fell to the ground, exhausted, and the protagonist thought that the pressure had stopped. Qin Shan turned to Qin Yu with dissatisfaction, asking him what he was doing. He said that if it weren't for him, Qin Shan would have turned the protagonist into mincemeat. Qin Yu calmly replied that he still needed his strength so that he could save his life, and not waste it on trifles. Changfeng thought that if Keqing didn't share the damage with him, there would be nothing left of him. He realized that this guy was really strong. The protagonist wiped the sweat off his face with his hand, gritting his teeth. Qin Shan immediately ran up to Keqing, cautiously asking her if she was okay. Keqing was still sitting on the ground, coughing loudly. Suddenly, Qin Yu walked up to her, stomping his foot loudly. He lowered his hand down with a magic pill, telling Keqing to take it. Qin Shan immediately worriedly shouted that this was the dope of the Forbidden Arena and asked Qin Yu, where did he get this? Changfeng was also worried and shouted that this was the dope. Qin Yu said that he couldn't wait any longer. He raised his head up, looking at the place where the cocoon with the arachnids was in the middle of the pentagram. He said that if she unlocked the potential of the Tree of Life, he would deal with the spider faster. Qin Shan immediately protested, shouting that Keqing was only level 15, so she wouldn't be able to withstand the effect of the drug. Keqing closed her eyes, and Qin Yu only calmly said that he still needed her, so he wouldn't let her die yet. Qin Shan silently looked at his brother, gritting his teeth. Qin Yu told him that it wasn't difficult for him to break the Tree of Life, so if he took another step, he would get rid of it without a second thought. Qin Shan immediately stopped after hearing these words from Qin Yu. The protagonist thought in surprise, why doesn't the effect of the hunting zone work on him? He clicked his tongue, looking at Qin Yu, and cursed in his mind, thinking about what to do. Changfeng said furiously, did this mean that Huaqing University was represented by a person who bullied the weak? This statement immediately attracted Qin Yu's attention. He turned to the protagonist, glaring at him angrily, but he was not given anything to do by Keqing, who held his hand and gradually began to stand up, saying that they did not have time, so she would take the medicine. Qin Shan sat down next to her in surprise to help her stand up. Keqing raised her stern gaze to Qin Yu, thanking the protagonist for standing up for her. However, it was up to her to decide. She said that she made a deal with him. Changfeng silently watched this, watching Keqing take the pill, and then Qin Yu locked them in another space. Keqing gave the command, forward. Qin Shan fell back due to the new dome that appeared, and after a few moments, Qin Yu and Keqing soared into the air, heading towards the cocooned arachnid. Qin Shan and Changfeng were left alone. They looked at each other in silence for a few seconds, when suddenly a huge mechanical bird landed next to them, on which Deng and Yen flew. They jumped off the bird to the ground and Deng sighed in disappointment, saying that they did not have time, they needed to fly faster. Zhou Yan told him that he had already said that talking was useless there. Qin Shan happily called them by name, smiling, saying that they were back. Yan folded his arms across his chest, asking Qin Shan if they had decided irrevocably about the spider. Qin Shan told him that it would take too long to tell. The protagonist silently watched them, thinking that these guys were very strong. Qin Shan then turned his gaze to Changfeng, asking the two who had arrived to help him deal with him. Lu Deng replied that they would only do so from the outside, because the higher your level, the stronger the hunting zone suppression works. Lu Deng said that even if they were level 15 now. Deng then asked him what kind of guy he was, referring to Changfeng. Qin Shan told him that he was a bit strange, because it seemed like the hunting zone suppression did not work on him at all. Qin Shan said that if he could use his trump card, he would have dealt with him a long time ago. Deng asked him if Qin Yu wanted to kill him. Yen didn't care. He began to warm up his fists with a smile on his face, saying that his hands were already itching. Zhou Yan began to move towards the protagonist, saying that he advised him to give it his all right away, otherwise there would be no such opportunity later. His body began to be enveloped in magical energy, and he walked towards the protagonist in a threatening manner. When Zhou turned to Li Shi, saying that it looked like they were in for an interesting show. Li Shi looked down at the scene below in surprise, while they were standing on the rubble of one of the buildings nearby. They had a perfect view of the beginning battle between the protagonist and Qin Yu's men who had arrived. Li Shi asked in surprise, were Yan and Deng there? Li Shi then turned his gaze to their opponent, asking, who was that guy next to them? When Zhou told him that she didn't know. Changfeng furrowed his brows, saying that this was already the third student from Huaqin University he had become disappointed in. He told them that they were all too confident. Yan raised his index finger, saying that the protagonist only had 1 minute to say his last word. But Changfeng was not that simple. He used his skill, gradually bringing his shadow closer and closer to his opponent's feet. Zhou said that something seemed wrong. And the city turned his gaze to her in surprise, asking what was wrong? Changfeng raised his hand and pointed it forward, saying that the same thing applies to him. The shadow's eyes sparkled, and then Zhou realized what was going on. Zhou Yan lowered his eyes down and saw the danger. Suddenly, another undead controlled by the protagonist appeared right from that shadow. He swung his sword, throwing his opponent far back. Yan looked up in surprise at the undead continuing to appear from the shadow, finally noticing that he was surrounded. The armed undead were clearly unfriendly. Each of them was going to fight. The protagonist used his power again, controlling the undead, and his opponent gradually began to be covered in fiery power. The corpse holding the sword swung towards Yan, who was gathering energy, and then launched the sword towards him. The weapon only missed his opponent's head by a few centimeters, but Yan still managed to dodge it. He turned his gaze to Changfeng, who was looking at him with stern eyes. Li Shi and Wen Zhou continued to watch, and Li Shi asked in surprise, what was the matter? Due to the suppression, Yan was level 15, however, he was still 2 levels higher than that guy. So Li Shi wondered, how did he manage to suppress Zhou Yan's fire form? Zhou folded her arms across her chest, saying thoughtfully that he was also a summoner. Yan moved to a pile of rocks, his body still engulfed in flames. He said that Changfeng was indeed a master, however, if that was all his power, he was finished. He wiped the sweat off his face with his finger, standing up to his full height. Changfeng mockingly replied that if he was level 13, he would have died long ago, but Yan countered that he was not level 13 after all. Lu Deng, who was also watching closely, said that this was the end. Qin Shan turned to face him, saying that even though he was level 15 now, however, the double power of the fire form was enough to kill anyone below level 15. Zhou Yan swung his fire fist, with a menacing smile on his face, saying that now his opponent would also feel the difference between them on him. He said that it was like an abyss. Sending a fire force forward with a blow, Yen sent a fire stream towards the protagonist. But Changfeng did not intend to stay, so she shouted that in this case, he would step over this abyss. Using his power, the protagonist began to summon many undead around himself, who were ready to stand up for him at any time. Changfeng shouted that they are using the monarch's skill, enhancement. Suddenly, all of these undead put their weapons together into one huge chain of scythes. And with just one move, one of the undead literally cut the fire strike that was flying towards the protagonist. Zhou and Li Shi were shocked. She asked in surprise, what did this mean? Qin Shan was also shocked by what happened, and the blow from the powerful scythes continued to approach Yen, about to overtake him. Zhou Yan thrust his fist forward, but he was saved from the blow by Deng, who, having acquired the form of a mechanized robot, protected Yen from the blow with a shield. The protagonist looked at this in surprise. Deng said that this was enough. Yen called his name with displeasure. Changfeng pointed his finger at his opponents, asking with seriousness, wasn't he the one who said that he was finished? Lu Deng respectfully said that he acknowledged that Changfeng was the strongest among the level 13 professionals besides Qin Yu. However, he also added that Changfeng would not be able to use that move again anytime soon. The protagonist asked him if he wanted to confirm this. Suddenly, he felt a strange feeling inside him. It was as if he was paralyzed from the inside. Changfeng turned around and saw Qin Shan, realizing that he was using prohibition magic. Qin Shan smiled evilly as he used his skill, however, Deng yelled at him to stop, telling him to better save his power for the boss. Qin Shan stopped using his skill on the protagonist, which he immediately sensed. Changfeng turned his gaze to Deng, asking him what he wanted. Lu Deng resumed his human form, landing on the ground. He calmly told him that he was offering to participate in capturing the purple gold monster. Changfeng indignantly asked him, what is he talking about? He asked, how could he decide for Qin Yu? Deng told him that the purple gold lair required a powerful summoner, and he was just a mechanic, and the machines worked for him. In addition, he also said that it took a long time, but now it seemed like they had a great candidate. They stood opposite each other, participating in this negotiation. Changfeng listened with interest to Deng, who, holding up 3 fingers, said that everything was simple, because before they did not have enough time, but now everything will be different. He explained to Changfeng that his mechanical bird received information that the monsters on Mount Shishan have begun to act, so within 3 days, an endless wave of monsters will appear here, so even Qin Yu understood the seriousness of the situation. Qin Shan frowned at him and asked what he meant by monsters in the city. He said that Lu Deng was overestimating these creatures too much. Qin Shan said that today, the human cities were not places where a bunch of monsters from Mount Shishan could easily invade. Deng turned to face him, saying that it was so, after all, the time and place of the purple gold monster's appearance this time was too thoughtful. He wondered if this was an unusual wave of monsters. Qin Shan objected, saying that monsters don't even have brains. So what could be so special about them? Zhou Yan turned to Deng, asking him, why did you have to make things so complicated? He asked him, wasn't this just another war between humans and monsters? Yan believed that their ferocity could simply be due to the awakening of a high-level monster. The protagonist listened to them in surprise, looking at his opponents. Zhou Yan pointed his finger at him, asking if he realized that it was that simple. He pointed his finger at him, and Deng turned his head away, saying that it was just a guess. Qin Shan asked, even if the purple gold monster is of high origin, can he start a war by himself? Lu Deng turned to face him threateningly, asking, what made him think that only one had awakened? Qin Shan asked him in surprise, did he want to say the opposite? The protagonist watched him closely as Deng continued to think out loud. Didn't he think that high-level monsters hadn't waged war against them for a long time? Changfeng lowered his gaze, thinking deeply about it. Deng said that the last general conscription was more than 10 years ago. Changfeng remembered how he was sitting at home as a child, and his Lin's mom was doing something around the house. Noticing her son's sad look, Lin's mom asked him in surprise, what was the matter? She turned around, looking at him, and Changfeng asked her why she asked the neighbor to take care of him and her sister. Lin's mom squatted in front of him, telling him that she and his dad were going on a business trip, and he was already an adult, so they could rely on him. Changfeng yelled out in frustration that she was lying. After all, he and his dad had never gone on business trips together, and before, she always said when she would return, but not this time. Suddenly, his father addressed him by his full name, asking him if he didn't admire heroes. His father smiled, saying that the first rule of a hero is to protect the motherland. His father smiled, asking his son if he understood that during their absence, he must protect the house and his sister? At that time, Changfeng turned to his younger sister, who silently looked at him with big eyes. At this time, the protagonist sadly lowered his eyes to the floor, mentally apologizing to his father, saying that he couldn't handle it, and his father never came back. Changfeng raised his eyes up, watching as the spatial cabin with Qinyu reached its destination. The protagonist mentally addressed his father again, saying that this rule was of no use to heroes. Suddenly, an explosion came from above where the spider cocoon was. Inside this explosion, Qinyu's silhouette appeared, along with 2 spatial cabins containing the spider and Kaching. Changfeng thought that a hero needed to become stronger. A strong gust of wind blew his hair as he watched the scene with the people from the Northern Hunters Association. Changfeng said that everything was a success. Qinyu hovered next to the 2 cabins, holding himself and them aloft. Gradually, the spiders that had been attacking the city began to disperse and evaporate, disappearing from the streets. Li Shi looked at his body in surprise, asking, "Has the effect of the hunting zone worn off?" Zhou, seeing what was happening above, said that Qinyu had subdued the spider. Li Shi asked in confusion, "Will they participate in the battle that awaits them all next?" Zhou smiled mockingly, asking him, "When did he become disheartened?" Li Shi said that no one could have known that Qinyu would be level 20. Their difference in strength was too big. After all, he didn't look like an ordinary professional at all. Li Shi folded his arms across his chest, watching Qinyu's work in the air. Zhou turned to face him, asking, "Did he think that the chairman sent them there to confront him head-on?" Li Shi said in surprise, "That's exactly it." He said that with her divination skills, how could she not know that they wouldn't be able to confront Qinyu? Li Shi wondered again, why were they there? Zhou closed her eyes, saying that it was because she predicted something. The chairman predicted that Qinyu would encounter his first failure in life. He still held the 2 spatial domes aloft, gradually descending with them. Yan ignited his fist again, thrusting it forward. His hand filled with fire, and Deng tried to call out his name. The protagonist immediately took cover behind the undead he had summoned after seeing the threat. But Zhou Yan cast a flame cage spell, surrounding the protagonist with flames around him. The fallen angel informed the protagonist that his undead had been killed. Changfeng wondered at this point, could this be the effect of the zone? However, he then realized that there were no other effects other than the heat. It seemed that this was just a trick to evaporate the spiritual power of the undead. Angered, Yan began to walk towards the protagonist while engulfed in flames, saying that he was now full of strength. The protagonist frowned, saying that this was strange, asking the opponent, why did he become slower then? Yan jumped into the air, swinging his fist, but the protagonist remained calm. Changfeng asked him, "Is it because this move consumed too much strength?" He said that in other words, even at the set level, he was trying too hard, which meant that he was afraid that he would be defeated. Zhou Yan flashed his eyes in anger, saying that this was nonsense. He shouted that this flame cage would not become his coffin. He pointed his fist at the protagonist, who said with a calm expression that he had not used this move for a long time. Changfeng smiled, using the soul decomposition skill. This skill, with just a glance from the protagonist, pushed his opponent away from him, causing him to fall. Yan rose up, but before he could recover, another undead of the protagonist swung at him with a scythe. This blow was again so close that Yan would not have time to react. However, Lu Deng saved him again, grabbing the scythe of the summoned undead before it could hit him. Deng said that they would end it here, because they needed to save their strength for the purple gold monster. The protagonist said ironically that some people don't think so, looking at the heavily breathing Yan who rose from the ground. Zhou Yan thought in horror, what happened? In that instant, his body seemed to freeze. He thought that he had never met a person who could make him freeze in horror. Even Qinyu did not succeed. He rose from the ground, pushing Deng's hand back with his other hand, and pointed at Changfeng, asking him, was it really an illusion? He said that they should fight again. After all, he did not believe that some level 13 guy could stand against him. Lu Deng told him to stop. He yelled at him, asking if he had completely forgotten what was happening right now. Deng told him to think better about how they would fight monsters. Yan looked away, silently listening as Deng asked him if he wanted them all to be buried there. Yan turned away, saying with displeasure that he had never lost to someone 7 levels below him. He started to walk away, saying that they would definitely fight again, but not now. Lu Deng took off his mechanical form, asking the protagonist to let him introduce himself. He said that he was from Huaqing University and said his name, and then said that the guy he fought was called Yen. The protagonist also introduced himself, saying that he was from Daoqing Middle School. Deng questioned him again, asking, could he really be the reawakened one that Keqing spoke of? He said that now it was clear why Qin Shan wanted to kill him. And then she said that this explained why he, at level 13, was so strong. Lu Deng asked him if he had already mastered the power of an awakened one. Changfeng asked in surprise, what kind of power of an awakened one is this? Deng asked him in surprise, doesn't he know? He asked if anyone had told him what changes would happen to him after his second awakening. Changfeng frowned and asked warily, what was he talking about? Deng thought that it seemed that the news had not yet spread and the forces of the various parties had not yet descended. His face became serious, and he thought that he was afraid that once they fell into their hands, freedom would be gone. Such was the war machine. Lu Deng immediately thought of Qin Yu. Changfeng first looked at Deng's thoughtful face in silence and then said, judging by everything, the changes would not be for the better. Lu Deng closed his eyes and calmly told him that he would soon find out about everything himself, because he could only tell him that professionals who had mastered the power of awakening could not be divided into simple levels, and ordinary professionals stopped being nothing in his eyes. However, Deng immediately pulled himself up short, thinking that this guy was already able to fight on par with Zhou Yan, even before he had mastered the awakening power. He couldn't help but wonder how strong he would be. Lu Deng looked at the protagonist with interest, and then his thoughts were interrupted by a loud bang. It was Qin Yu landing on the ground with Keqing. Qin Shan hurried over, calling her name loudly. As he ran closer, he crouched down next to her, telling Qin Yu that if anything happened to her, he would finish him off. Keqing was exhausted, but still found the strength to say that she was fine. Deng called the protagonist, telling him to follow him, because now it was time to fight the purple gold monster. The three of them headed towards Qin Yu, and Li Shi, meanwhile, asked Zhou, who had also started to descend, what should they do now? Zhou asked Li Shi if he did not believe in the chairman's prophecies. He said that was not entirely true. Zhou said that they would act as the circumstances required. While they were descending, Luntic, Yen, and Qin Yu were discussing something. Qin Yu thoughtfully lowered his eyes, repeating the words about the wave of monsters. Lu Deng explained to him that the sudden appearance of a wave of monsters looked very suspicious, and although nothing was known yet, however, he felt that their target was here. He said with a seriousness that no matter how strong their attack was, they would have to leave within 3 days. Deng pointed his hand at the protagonist, saying that fortunately, this would greatly shorten their time, so he believed that he should have been allowed to join them. Qin Yu carefully looked at Changfeng, asking what was so difficult about it. A scroll appeared in his hand. He looked at it in surprise, and Keqing asked him if he remembered the treasure map of the secret realm that she spoke of. Qin Shan was helping her up when she said that in Qin Yu's hands was a complete map that led to the nest of the purple gold boss, the nest of the purple wing. Her face showed fatigue from past adventures. Qin Yu meanwhile opened the map, starting to apply mana to it. Suddenly, the ground parted and a huge crack appeared, with dark energy oozing out. The protagonist looked at it in surprise, and Keqing explained to him that the treasure map could open the secret realm anywhere within the relevant limits. She said that there was a purple gold nest in that crack. Qin Yu turned to face them, seriously telling them to go if they were not afraid. The next moment, he jumped into that crack, plunging into the abyss. Yan looked at Qin Yu walking down, asking what was going on with Qin Yu. He said that before, they would find a secluded place and open a passage there, but now, anyone could enter the secret realm. Everyone looked at the huge crack right in the middle of the square with indignation. Deng thoughtfully put his hand to his chin, making mental guesses. Suddenly, people who passed by noticed that crack, asking, what is going on there? They began to talk happily. Could this be the entrance to the secret kingdom? The second passerby said that he seemed to sense the aura of monsters. They leaned over the rift with interest, looking at what was inside. Lu Deng turned to face them, saying that he did not advise them to go down there. The passerby raised his head in surprise, asking him if he knew what was in there. But Deng was not going to chat with him for long, saying that this was all he could say. Then he commanded everyone that they were going, and the whole team jumped into the rift. The passersby began to shout that they were going down, so there must be a lot of treasure there. They believed that they would not let them take everything for themselves,